Chapter 661, Sealed Door. The man who doesn't spare even his little sister. Of course, Xietain had no idea that Lilith had decided to appear in front of Shangguan Bingshui with unknown intentions and had angered her, nor did he know that Shangguan Bingshui was even brave and self-confident enough to threaten the powerful higher existence of Sixth Order. If he knew about it, he would probably ask Lilith to give him an explanation for her peculiar behavior, and of course he would also feel warmed since what Shangguan Bingshui had made was more than enough proof of how important he and his friendship was to her. At that time, oblivious about everything that had just happened, Xietain was walking towards the deepest part of the upper floor of the library under the guidance of one of the rifleman soldiers who came into the ancient ruin together with half of the group. Soon, Xietain was led to the end of the corridor, right in front of a wooden bookshelf that didn't seem to have anything unusual on it. He looked curiously at the soldier standing next to him, and the man nodded in silent response before stepping forward and moving a particular book. Crack! Surprisingly, just like in movies and TV dramas, with a loud crack the wooden bookshelf moved slightly away from the wall, revealing a gap through which one could easily reach in and push the bookshelf open. While we were moving the books just as Miss Wuijuan ordered us to, I accidentally found this. The soldier who called Xietain and led him here explained in a serious voice. Then his voice changed from seriousness to awe and reverence as he said in a flattering voice, "I think Miss Wuijuan suspected that there might be a hidden door, and that's why she gave us that strict instruction. But now that this has happened, I must say that her foresight is truly otherworldly." Xietain heard the soldier's words and could not help but sigh in his heart. It was more than clear that Wuijuan was still remembering what had happened during the second ancient ruin. For fear of missing out on any kind of thing that could somehow help the progress of the faction that they had basically created from the moment they had joined together at the university to face the dangers of the new earth, she had commanded everyone to start moving the books in different patterns before removing them from the shelves, which meant that she somehow or other suspected that perhaps there might be a hidden mechanism at work here. Unlike Xietain and probably 99% of those who had entered into this ancient ruin, Wuijuan had not forgotten about the hidden mechanisms. With all the magic circles and runes the group had been seeing all this time, each of them had subconsciously forgotten the existence of other, far simpler and much more traditional methods of hiding important things. In fact, it was only now that Xietain realized that during this entire tour inside the ancient library he had not actually seen even a single magic circle, and there were only separate runes that, according to Meng Qi, were meant for preservation. "I'll thank her and ask if there's anything she wants as a reward later," Xietain thought to himself as he hoped that Wuijuan would not ask for something that would force him to say no. "Team leader, be careful," said suddenly the man who led him here. "When I first spotted this place, I didn't dare to move on my own, so I immediately left everything as it was and called you, so I don't know what might come out on the other side." You've done a good job. You just back off just in case," Xietain said mildly, and the soldier quickly stepped aside as he clutched the electromagnetic rifle tightly. Under the attentive and wary eyes of the rifleman, Xietain slowly moved the wooden shelf out of the way by opening it as if it were a door. However, what he saw there was definitely something neither he nor the soldier expected to see. What greeted the eyes of Xietain and the soldier behind him was a double wooden door with two golden handles and a bizarre antique-looking latch. It was the typical wooden door that could be seen in supernatural movies that had vampire or wizard academies and the like. But the most remarkable thing was that on the door, drawn on the wood with golden ink, a magic circle of at least 2.5 meters in diameter with extremely complex runes glowed faintly as if to show its latent activity. In addition, on the corner of the wall was a small white sign with a few words written in Mandarin Chinese. "Office of the Director?" Xietan's expression turned a bit weird as he read those words. He squatted down and tried to see beyond the door, but somehow was not surprised when all he saw was darkness. It was as clear as day that one of the runes that made up the golden magic circle was in charge of shielding the view inside the room from the outside. Xietain tried to open the door but was also not at all surprised when he failed to make the handles move at all. As for trying to destroy the door and open an entrance on his own, Xietain did not dare to do such a thing. To begin with, he didn't know whether this place had a defense mechanism or not. However, his main reason was the golden magic circle that flashed like a living thing trying to warn him about the danger it represented to life. No one in Xietan's faction had a great deal of knowledge about magic circles, and the only person who was just beginning to learn was Meng Qi. However, everyone who joined this expedition and was still alive had it clear in their hearts that if there were magic circles capable of teleporting large numbers of people and protecting structures from the changes the world was going through, then there should definitely be attacking magic circles with enough power to annihilate all kinds of threats. Want to see more chapters? Besides, As Bai Zemin stared intently at that golden circle that was flashing at him and even released a slight vibrating sound, he felt every cell in his body screaming for him not to do what for a second crossed his mind. There were few things that Bai Zemin feared, and in fact, the only time he felt similar pressure was when Emperor Thanath of the Azura race appeared before him during the invasion of Oblong World. Considering that with all his trump cards on the table and utilizing the combat experience he had gained so far during his various battles to the death, as well as his wits and bestial instincts, Bai Zemin was confident that he would be able to take the life of a peak third-order existence if he risked his life. However, he was self-aware and was clear that at least before he converted to a second-order existence, wanting to fight against a fourth-order existence was no different from suicide. In fact, back then in Oblong World, Bai Zemin could barely cause any damage to Emperor Thanath even with his Void Fist, which undoubtedly belonged to the category of powerful and destructive skills in his arsenal. One had to remember that the Bai Zemin at that time was getting a lot of power boosts, among which was a 20% increase to his overall strength thanks to the effect of the title Destroyer of Destroyers. Considering that only peak third order and fourth order existences presented mortal danger in a 1 versus 1 against Bai Zemin, the golden magic circle in front of him should definitely be able to unleash power comparable to the power of one of those two scales. Probably its fourth order. Bai Zemin sighed before reluctantly taking a step back. Team leader, that door. The soldier behind hesitated as if uncertain whether to continue. Go and get Meng Qi. Tell her I need her help up here. Bai Zemin ordered in a deep voice. Roger. Big brother, this magic circle is even more advanced than the teleportation circles we saw before. I don't even understand a single rune out of all the ones in it. Meng Qi shook her head and rubbed her eyes hard as they had turned somewhat red after being exposed to the constant waves of mana flowing in and out of the golden magic circle. Are you alright? Bai Zemin asked with concern as he gently stroked her delicate back. I'm okay. Meng Qi nodded and gradually stopped rubbing her closed eyes. She looked at him with her beautiful eyes still reddish and said in a voice thick with regret, Big brother, I'm sorry. Not only am I weak in strength, but now I can't even help you with the single thing you expect me to do for you. She even bit her lip hard to the point where small drops of blood appeared on them. Bai Zemin hurriedly pulled her into his embrace and while caressing her hair tenderly said in a serious voice, Meng Qi, are you silly? I thought my little sister was the smartest of all? This magic circle is something that even I am fearful of and I dare not touch it casually. It's completely normal that you can't understand anything about it, silly girl. Bai Zemin's words were undoubtedly helpful as Meng Qi's heart immediately felt more at ease. After all, if even her big brother who in her eyes was a practically divine existence couldn't do anything, then there was no way she who was thousands of miles behind him could do something. It was just that she really wanted to be of use to him, and feeling that she had failed him was a bit unbearable. Looking at Bai Zemin who was slowly managing to calm Meng Qi down with his cuddles, Lilith couldn't help but smile and said in a joking tone, You little scoundrel, you and this little beauty are not related by blood, right? Could it be that you plan to not even let your little sister go? Bai Zemin almost fell to the ground when he heard Lilith's words and to Meng Qi's shock he began to cough furiously with his face as red as an African monkey's butt. Big brother, are you okay? Meng Qi looked at him in shock and for a second she thought that maybe the golden magic circle had launched an invisible attack before realizing that if she was okay then, such a thing was not possible. Bai Zemin did not respond to Meng Qi and instead looked at Lilith with incredulity. He really felt like spanking her hard right now and if it wasn't for Meng Qi present Bai Zemin would definitely sit on the ground with her lying face down on his lap before he started spanking her, until her bottom remembered the size and warmth of his palm. Damn it, woman! How dare you say those words and with that foxy grin on your face? Bai Zemin wanted nothing more than to shout those words and catch Lilith to give her the punishment she deserved. But to avoid looking like a madman talking to the air he decided to swallow his words for the moment. Ha ha ha. Lilith couldn't help but laugh with delight at the ever-changing expression on Bai Zemin's face. This was the first time she had ever seen him so awkward and even embarrassed about something. It seemed to be that she had found another weakness in him, and Lilith would certainly use it to tease him more often from now on. Chapter 662 Fourth Order Kong Guiying Cursed Healer Xia, Part 1. Because the number of books was too large and it was still necessary to inspect the inside of the huge library to avoid missing important things, Bai Zemin left Wuijuan behind with Kai Jingyi to help her giving orders to the group of soldiers and soul evolvers that would continue to work on the third ancient ruin. As for Bai Zemin and Shangguan Bing Shui, they both went out shoulder to lead the half of the group waiting outside the third pagoda to challenge the trial of the fourth silver pagoda of the five. As for Meng Qi, she asked Bai Zemin to let her stay in the third ruin as she apparently had the intention of studying the golden magic circle from a distance. Meng-Chi had not given up yet, and while she was aware that she would most likely not be able to open the door to the sealed room, she at least hoped to be able to find something that could help her big brother in the near future. Bai Zemin naturally allowed Meng-Chi to stay in the third ruin, but only after she promised him with all her heart that she would not go close of the golden magic circle. After all, Meng-Chi would not gain soul power from defeating golems created by human hands and not naturally born. Besides, her strength was indeed deficient for the battles that were to come, and with her in a much safer place, Bai Zemin would feel lighter during the combat he was about to face. With Wu Yijuan, Kai Jingyi, and Meng-Chi taking charge, Bai Zemin had nothing to worry about. By the time everything that could be taken from the third ancient ruin was carefully analyzed, the power of the transcendent faction led by Bai Zemin would definitely grow tremendously once they were able to apply the information obtained from the huge mountain of old books. After Bai Zemin and Shangguan Bingshui came out of the third pagoda having been teleported there, the duo was naturally attacked with questions from Sun Ling and the other leaders of the different guilds. Fortunately, everyone calmed down after hearing from Bai Zemin that Wu Yijuan and the others were fine and that the reason they were not leaving soon was because the third ruin turned out to be actually a huge library with many books and knowledge that would surely be of great help to them from now until what would be at least a century or two in the distant future. Sun Ling was the one who was obviously the most relieved to see that Bai Zemin was calm and didn't seem to be lying about anything he said. After all, any mother would be worried not to see her daughter return after having stepped into an unfamiliar and probably dangerous place, not to mention Sun Ling, who had only a little over a week ago been reunited with Wu Yijuan. Are we attacking the fourth pagoda with just such numbers? Feng Hong asked with some concern in his tone of voice. The eyes of everyone focused on Bai Zemin, waiting for his next words. No, you will not be part of the next raid. I want all of you to retreat to the perimeter of the square right now. Bai Zemin's words were like a giant boulder falling into the middle of a silent lake that had been in a state of quiescence for several tens of years. What? Why? Team leader, I cannot accept such an order. Absolutely not. We have come so far fighting all together, how can we retreat now? We bleed together and die together. That's how it is. True. True. The roars of the humans were so powerful that even the beasts on the edge of the mountain range surrounding the 5 silver pagodas were muted. It did not matter if it was Feng Hong, Ting Hua, Huang Tian, Liang Jing, or any soldier or soul evolver, but they all seemed to turn into ants that were suddenly thrown into the boiling frying pan as they began to object to Bai Zemin's decision with fervor. Even Feng Tianwu frowned tightly, and it could be seen that she was not happy with the decision she had just heard. Bai Zemin was speechless, just like Shangguan Bingshui, as he saw the people in front of him getting agitated in such a way. However, his surprise very soon turned into an overflow of warmth as he realized what was going on. Everyone present had seen how strong Bai Zemin was, strong to the point of annihilating an army composed of over 5 million mutant weaver ants in an instant, and strong enough for the mighty golden golem whose strength was comparable to a second-order existence to become nothing but a joke under the power of his sword. However, even after such demonstrations of overwhelming power and outstanding ability, everyone was worried in their own way about him. No matter the reason, the reality was that each and every one present feared that something would happen to the brave young man who had barely been a part of the Chinese Renaissance faction for about a week and a half, but had already conquered the heart of everyone present. Sun Ling took a step forward and, while looking at Bai Zemin with a serious expression rarely seen on her ever-playful face, said in a melodious voice, I think you have already noticed it, but to everyone here you have become a figure they want to follow. Thanks to you, this expedition did not turn into the burial of each of us as it should have been, no matter who other led us. It is only because the leader is you that everyone here is alive and that there were less than 50 casualties, even though the level of danger we faced this time outweighed by far any other. Bai Zemin stayed silent, and after a short pause, Sun Ling continued, It doesn't matter how you see them, but I think I speak for everyone when I say that each and every one of the warriors behind me sees you as an important brother they don't want to lose. Bai Zemin said nothing and instead watched in detail the expressions of each of the people in front of him. But it was not necessary for him to look around too much to realize that in fact, the words of Wu Yijuan's mother basically represented what at least 80% of those present felt. Ting Hua, who rarely said anything, took a step forward and, while stroking his snake, said with his characteristic gentle smile, Leader Bai, even though we have only known each other for a little over 2 days, the number of dangerous situations we have faced together is large enough to write a history book if we wanted to. Relationships among us who fight with the single common purpose of regaining our homeland and saving our compatriots can be formed in seconds after fighting on the battlefield and bleeding for a fellow brother. As such, I hope you will revoke your order and let us fight alongside you as we have been doing so far. Want to see more chapters? Cough. Cough. This old man here thinks what little Hua said is very true. Cough. Cough. Liang Jing interjected in between raspy coughs. Hey, surnamed Liang. Who are you calling little Hua? You're younger than me. Tinghua couldn't help but exclaim with wide eyes as he glared at the peculiar assassin as if he wanted to set him on fire with his gaze. But Liang Jing turned a deaf ear and after taking several deep breaths to regain the lost oxygen continued speaking slowly. The relationships formed on the battlefield are often the firmest and hardest to break, becoming purer than blood relationships. Cough. Cough. There may be some lucky ones among us who do not know the pain of losing a loved one who shares their blood. But there are definitely no lucky ones who do not know the pain of losing a brother or sister in arms. Basically, no one wanted to experience that pain unless they really had no choice to take. And from the firm look on everyone's face and their stern words, Bai Zemin realized that the words of a few represented all of them. If it was the past him before the skill stone heart evolved, then there was a possibility that Bai Zemin would reprimand with a beating anyone who dared to disobey him. However, he was no longer a leader who only watched over his family but now also watched over his subordinates, who in their own way showed concern for him. Did this mean that he had become weaker? Bai Zemin was not quite sure about that, but it was probably partially true to some extent. However, he did not dislike his current self. Everyone shut the fuck up. He shouted at the top of his lungs. His voice was loud enough for a considerably powerful sound wave to push some of the soldiers in front to the back, and at the same time as the voices of protest and desire to fight stopped abruptly, they all looked at Bai Zemin with eyes filled with shock. Weren't you trained to know that the order of a superior must be carried out regardless of what it is? Bai Zemin said in a harsh voice after the silence took over. Some of them did not have much reaction to those words as most of the soul evolvers present had barely taken military training for 2 months at most. However, the riflemen carrying the electromagnetic rifles were embarrassed and subconsciously lowered their heads, since for them obeying orders was as natural as being filial to their parents. Fortunately, however, Bai Zemin's next words greatly lightened the mood and depressing atmosphere that was beginning to form around the group. Besides, if you all really see me as a brother, then why the hell are you making such a big deal out of something so small? He said. At the slightly surprised looks from the soul evolvers and rifle-wielding soldiers, Bai Zemin smiled slightly and said in a mocking voice, I, the father of you all, do not fear even third-order existences, not to mention some second-order little ones. In my estimation, it is highly probable that this time the mechanical golems with the power of first-order existences will be replaced by golden mechanical golems with the strength of second-order existences. In case this comes true, all of you will not be able to help me, and instead, I will have to divert my attention. And while I am confident of defeating several thousand second order, I am not confident of achieving this in a clean way if I have to take care of all of you. Even knowing this, you want to step in? The only response Bai Zemin received was silence, and as his eyes swept over those present, it was not hard to notice that everyone seemed to finally begin to think things through more rationally. Therefore, to top it all off, Bai Zemin said with a chuckle, besides, all of you do not need to worry at all, because if I die, you will follow me not long after. Sun Ling and Xiaya looked at Bai Zemin in disbelief, but Shangguan Bingshui, who had been awkwardly silent all this time, couldn't stop the corner of her mouth from twitching a couple of times as she secretly shook her head. Pwahahahaha. Feng Hong suddenly started laughing out loud. His laughter was so powerful that the aura in his body began to boil, and those closest to him quickly backed away as they felt their armor heat up. The man's red hair shook like crazy as he looked at Bai Zemin and shouted to the four winds. I, Feng Hong, have rarely in my life felt admiration for anyone, and certainly never did for someone who could even be my son. However, Brother Bai's bravery has opened my eyes today. I previously did not believe your words of regaining the homeland in less than a year, even after all I saw today. However, now that I hear your words, for some reason feel that if it is you, such a thing is no longer impossible. Very well. Since in the worst case scenario we will all die right here, then let this old man trust you completely for the first time. Feng Hong's personality was like the flames he controlled. If he liked something, then he would shout it out, and if something displeased him, then he would turn it into ashes, plain and simple. Oh well, isn't it just dying? Tinghua sighed and stroked his snake as he quietly said, Xiao Bei, are you afraid of death? The snake hurriedly hissed at him and looked offended as it wrapped itself tighter around Tinghua's body, making him grunt and apologize immediately. Forget it, forget it. Huang Tian let his large shield rest on the ground and waved his free hand as he said loudly, if the worst comes to the worst, then we will all be buried in this place. This gentleman has destroyed over 2,000 golems with the strength of a first order despite being a defense-focused fighter. I think I've earned my place in the heavens. Right. This senior here even destroyed over 1,000 golems despite being an ordinary soldier. A man shouted with enthusiasm as he clenched his electromagnetic rifle tightly. Like the fall of a chip of dominoes affecting their nearby peers, and with the process repeating itself hundreds of times just by the fall of a single piece, all the soul evolvers and soldiers began to shout with enthusiasm their achievements to this day, as if they were not fearful of the no small possibility of death that was slowly approaching them. Bai Zemin shook his head and chuckled without commenting any more on the matter. On the other hand, Shangguan Bingshui had a faint smile on her beautiful face, and as she looked at Bai Zemin's profile no longer as indifferent as before, she reaffirmed even more her resolve to do whatever she could to help him be happy no matter the consequences. But what neither of them knew was that in fact, death was sometimes even closer than one expected, and whether they managed to escape from its scythe or not, it was not in their power to decide. Chapter 663, Fourth Order Kongguiying Cursed Healer Xietain, Part 2. Bai Zemin made sure that everyone backed up to the edge of the large stone square but did not allow anyone to leave the perimeter where the magic circle was located, because while no one was sure how the circle worked, it was clear that the only reason the mutant beasts and plants did not approach was due to some particular rune that probably released some kind of fragrance or wave that the non-rational beings did not like. Currently, the human group was deep in one of the forests of the entire mountain range, so there was definitely a lot of first order and maybe even some second order existences roaming the area. If they left the safe area, it would be a matter of time before they became food for the giant beasts. Even so, the group had spread out among the buildings in the square so that those more evolved could clearly see what would happen during the battle that was to come. Of course, it wasn't as if they all listened to Bai Zemin and retreated. "I will not go with them." Such were Shangguan Bingshui's words when Bai Zemin looked at her. "Actually, I already knew that." Bai Zemin scratched his head and sighed. "Honestly, even I don't know if I can fight tens of thousands of golden golems with the strength of a second order. So I do appreciate your help." Shangguan Bingshui nodded as if she was very satisfied with Bai Zemin's words and said no more. "I will also remain here and help the two of you." A clear and melodious voice sounded from behind Bai Zemin and Shangguan Bingshui just as the two were preparing to start the trial. Turning around, Bai Zemin saw Xietain standing with bare hands and wearing the same leather armor as before. "If you want to. But, are you sure? Your mission should be just to take care of Sun Ling, shouldn't it?" Bai Zemin looked at her intrigued. "Just like you said before, if you die then we will all die anyway," Xietain pointed out before continuing in a voice that was neither cold nor warm. "Besides, my mission is not specifically to take care of Miss Sun and in case of need young Miss Wu. My mission is to make sure they both make it to the base alive. But for that to happen you need to live at least until these trials are over." Bai Zemi shook his head and said no more on the matter. Xietain was a mysterious person even until now. The woman had not even shown any signs of having a weapon so far, and her way of fighting enemies was quite mediocre in Bai Zemin's eyes considering that she was a second-order existence. "Bingshui, you check the other bronze statue." "Okay." Xietain watched silently as Bai Zemin and Shangguan Bingshui walked towards the two bronze lion statues opposite each other on both sides of the huge dark door of the fourth pagoda, and just like the previous cases, the two lay on the ground for a few seconds before standing up again. Bai Zemin and Shangguan Bingshui looked at each other and both saw the bitterness in the eyes of the other. "Ladies first," Bai Zemin said with the intention of letting her vent first. The bitter expression on Shangguan Bingshui's face grew as she said through her teeth, 10,000 first order and 20 second order. Bai Zemin forced a smile that was actually so ugly that he looked like he was crying and shook his head when he heard her say that. "Same with the other statue. 10,000 first order soul stones and 20 second order soul stones?" Xietain exclaimed in shock, one of the few times she lost the neutral expression on her face. She looked at both of them with wide eyes and said in surprise, "Where are we supposed to get all those soul stones from? Even the entire Chinese Renaissance doesn't have that many first-order soul stones, and forget about the second-order ones." First-order existences, despite being considerably more normal now compared to the past since they could be found with relative ease as long as one went a little deeper into the forests, were living beings with enough power to wipe out an armed team of 1,000 men with no problem at all. As for those of the second order, Xietain herself was an existence of that caliber, so she understood how terrifying they were, and the fact that in nearly 300,000 human survivors there were barely 3 second-order beings was proof of how rare they were. However, the two bronze statues in front of her were demanding a total of 20,000 first-order soul stones that could only be obtained by killing existences within that scale of power and 20 second-order soul stones. All this in itself was already insane, but if one took into account that one would not always obtain soul stone by killing an enemy, then that insanity became even greater insanity. "Looks like we'll have to give up on the remaining two pagodas for now." Xietain sighed and shook her head. Even though it's a shame, we have no choice. At this rate it will take us at least several years to gather so many second-order soul stones, but even then we can't exclude that we need them to evolve our skills, and they'll probably be even more necessary after we learn the contents of the books we obtained during the third pagoda's raid. Oh well. At least we got some good resources this time and also found out the secret of the Silver Mountain Pagoda Forest. The mission Xietain had given by Zemin was to discover the reason why the 5 silver pagodas inside the Chongping mountain range did not collapse like all the other buildings during the earthquake that shook the earth during its expansion, and in the process demonstrate his ability to lead evolved troops and normal human troops. Considering the high level of success of the mission, it was a given that the power of the faction would soon be handed over by Xietain to Bai Zemin. However, who was Bai Zemin? Since when had he ever backed down in the face of challenges? If the price to pay is high, then the reward certainly will be too. Bai Zemin said as he waved his hand and with a bleeding heart allowed several thousand first-order soul stones to fall on the ground. Xia was speechless, but as she picked one up and saw that she had coincidentally picked up a first-order one, she set it down and picked up another, only to realize that this was also a first-order soul stone, and then another, and another, and another. So many first-order soul stones. Xia muttered in amazement and subconsciously asked as she stared at him, "Where did you get so many of these from?" "This is my Christmas present," Bai Zemin said through gritted teeth. Seeing him so resolute, Shangguan Bingshui sighed in her heart. What Bai Zemin was doing now was a huge gamble, to say the least. The Transcendent Faction's treasury had around 100,000 first-order soul stones, while the number of second-order soul stones was only 52. Taking out around 1/4 of the total first-order soul stones and over 1/3 of the total second-order soul stones to open a door that would lead them to a treasure that might or might not be worth it, was too big a risk that few would be willing to take. After all, even if what was inside the 4th ancient ruin was useful but had no immediate use like the soul stones, then the strength of the faction would stagnate for a long time. Such a thing was too dangerous in a world like this where time was extremely precious, even though ironically everyone had higher life expectancies. Soon, under Xiaoya's incredulous eyes, 2 small mountains of 10,000 soul stones each and 2 small piles that were composed of 20 second-order soul stones each glittered on the ground. My God! Xiaoya felt like she might faint from shock. She looked at Bai Zemin and Shangguan Bingshui looking indifferent as they threw soul stone after soul stone into the bronze lion's mouth, and she felt as if a part of her existence was being ripped away from her. Jesus Christ! Those two were casually throwing the first and second-order soul stones as if they were throwing rocks into the lake. Xiaoya soon realized that the 2 people in front of her were too mysterious, even more mysterious than she herself knew she was. However, she was aware that for Bai Zemin and Shangguan Bingshui to be able to obtain such a large amount of soul stones of such high quality, the strength of both of them definitely had to be monstrously high. She lowered her head for several seconds and her eyes constantly flashed with hesitation as if she was trying to make some kind of decision. However, it didn't take her very long to raise her head again with firmness and resolve in her once hesitant gaze. As to what decision she had made, probably only Xiaoya herself knew. It took but a few minutes for Bai Zemin and Shangguan Bingshui to finish feeding the 2 bronze statues with the necessary soul stones, so when the last of second order fell through the mouth of the bronze lion to the now glowing stomach, both statues immediately released the characteristic pale blue radiance, just as it had happened to the other 3 pagodas before. Bingshui, Xiaoya, get ready to fight. Bai Zemin immediately pulled out his weapon and took an attack stance as he said those words. I see you're really taking it to heart this time. Shangguan Bingshui frowned slightly as she saw the weapon Bai Zemin was using. Xiaoya's pupils contracted to the size of a needle, and for an instant, her entire body shuddered as she looked at the giant sword Bai Zemin held in front of him with both hands clutching the hilt. Crimson-red lightning flashed from within what seemed to be a small jewel embedded in the center of the guard and flickered along the huge blade of the weapon, creating small thundering sounds in the process. This was the first time since she began her evolution that Xiaoya felt fear in the face of a weapon. As I said, even I don't dare to underestimate several thousand second-order existences and probably some third-order existences. Bai Zemin reaffirmed his grip on the hilt of Crimson Thunder Dragon's last words as he said those words. A single swing of his greatsword in the past could break Earth's spatial barrier, that's how powerful the weapon in his hands was. Bai Zemin was sure that one swing with his full strength using this mighty weapon was more than enough to shatter anything that came his way. Shangguan Bingshui also decided to get serious, seeing him so serious, and soon activated many of her skills. She unsheathed her rank 2 sword, created another sword using Ice Maker which was composed of over 300 mana points, activated Luminous Ice Armor, Frost Rebuff, and others to boost her battle power to the maximum possible. Xia, seeing the two of them getting so serious, actually jumped back and put some distance between her and what would soon become the main battlefield. Her move naturally attracted the attention of Shangguan Bingshui and Bai Zemin, but since she didn't explain anything, neither of them said much either, as they didn't count too much on her, to begin with. Even if Xia was strong, she was only second order at most. Soon many golden golems with the power of second order existences would come out from the pagoda, so in fact, Xia's strength was quite useless unless her soul power was extremely pure like Bai Zemin's and Shangguan Bingshui's was. However, neither Bai Zemin nor Shangguan Bingshui knew that in reality, Xia was really powerful, and although her soul power was considerably pure, her greatest source of power was different. Her class. Bai Zemin did not know, but in reality, if Xia was his enemy at heart and she joined hands with Wu Keqian and Sun Yun, then he would probably have to turn and run to keep his life. In fact, Wu Yijuan's father really did not want to be Bai Zemin's enemy for his own reasons. Otherwise, it would not have been so easy for Bai Zemin even with Shangguan Bingshui's help. Xia was not strong alone, but she was undoubtedly terrifying, and the more powerful her battle companions were, the more terrifying she would become. Chapter 664, Fourth Order Kongguaying Cursed Healer Xia, Part 3. Under the watchful eyes of Bai Zemin and the two women, the pale blue glow surrounding the two bronze statues soon began to spread around the square with the fourth pagoda as the center. At this point, there were already 6 out of 10 parts of the entire square tinged with faint green color, and now another 2 out of 10 parts were lighting up, except that the color of the 7th and 8th parts was pale blue, which meant that there was an incoming challenge that needed to be completed before the color turned green and the victor could access the ancient ruin to get the treasures inside it left from distant times. The group led by Bai Zemin was already accustomed to such sights after having challenged the trials of 3 pagodas. However, soon, a strange little event that clearly did not happen before took place. Rumble. What happened? Shangguan Bingshui immediately became alert as she felt the ground beneath her feet shaking slightly. Bai Zemin did not respond, and the expression on his face was becoming more and more serious as he realized that there was perhaps something he had overlooked. Or maybe the person who built this place decided to change the patterns for the last 2 pagodas. If this was the case, then what Bai Zemin and the 2 women were about to face might be a lot worse than several thousand second-order beings. Bai Zemin turned slightly to look at Lilith and tried to see something in her expression, but unfortunately for him, the expression on her face was flat and emotionless, so he finally had no choice but to give up and look at the 2 giant doors that were slowly beginning to open backward, revealing the characteristic darkness that was in all the pagodas so far. If she can keep that indifferent expression, it means that at the very least I shouldn't fall in here. Or should I? Bai Zemin thought to himself, somewhat unsure about the matter. Flash! 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 Just as with the previous 3 pagodas, the glowing red eyes lit up in the middle of the darkness, and an instant later the group of Bai Zemin noticed small blue dots that in less than a split second had turned into soccer ball-sized balls of energy. Bai Zemin and the 2 women already knew what those bright blue energy balls meant. Scram! Bai Zemin took a step forward and slashed his greatsword ferociously from up to down as he let out a thunderous roar. Boom! The air in front of Bai Zemin exploded at the terrifying pressure of Crimson Thunder Dragon's last words and his terrifying strength. At the same time as a huge sphere of pressurized air formed and shot forward at lightning speed, pushing Xia and Shangguan Bingshui several steps back and splitting the air into 2 parts. Hundreds of bright energy beams shot out from inside the pagoda and in an instant met head-on with the huge sphere of air that had been formed by Bai Zemin swinging his weapon. When the hundreds of energy beams fired from inside the pagoda by golems clearly carrying electromagnetic rifles met the huge air sphere, there was no explosion and no real crash, as the energy beams seemed to have found their natural nemesis, and while some of them were ejected and sent flying in random directions, most of them turned into shattered energy particles. The sphere of air that was like a small world measuring over 20 meters in diameter continued its path, creating small explosions in the process until it finally arrived in front of the pagoda. Boom! What happened was the representation of how many times the aftershock or cause of an attack could be more resonant in comparison to the attack itself. The pagoda, despite not collapsing, this time no longer stood as firm as before because it actually trembled slightly once the wind sphere could not get through the door due to its size. The wind sphere exploded, and that wind instantly turned into thousands of sharp blades that were sent flying in all directions, propelled by the power of the explosion. The shooter golems inside resisted at first, but after several hundred cuts their armor began to shatter, and after a few thousand their metal bodies began to crack as if they were made of dry sand and then hit by a truck. Golems along with electromagnetic rifles alike were shattered beyond recognition. But not even a second passed when more red eyes appeared in the inner darkness of the pagoda, and then beams of energy shot outward again. Second order. Xietain roared loudly and unhesitatingly swung his greatsword again in a wide diagonal arc. The atmosphere exploded as if dozens of grenades detonated at the same time, and all opposition from nature was cut in half by Crimson Thunder Dragon's last words. This time, what was formed as a result of the diagonal arc was a huge blade of sharp wind over 200 meters long and which crushed the incoming energy beams entirely before slamming into the fourth pagoda. Boom! It had only been maybe 3 seconds at most, but the pagoda that had stood firm was now beginning to hesitate after receiving 2 attacks from Xietain, even though he was more than 300 meters distance away. In the process, at least 2,000 golems were hit and most of them were turned into unusable scrap. It was just at that moment when, just as Xietain had predicted earlier, over 5,000 golden golems carrying giant swords burst out from inside the rumbling pagoda and with agility corresponding to second-order warriors closed the distance between them and the human trio in a heartbeat. Ice Spear! Shangguan Bingshue's voice was like heavenly music amidst the rumbling of the earth. She pointed towards the sky and with the activation of Ice Maker, the air above her head began to freeze very fast. The frozen particles soon began to take shape and in less than 2 seconds over 1,000 spears appeared before they instantly began to fall like frozen meteors at the open pagoda. The ice spears created by Shangguan Bingshue did not make explosive noise like the swings of Xietan's greatsword, nor did they destroy the golems into thousands of pieces after hitting them. The ice spears froze the air they touched, creating beautiful stairs to the sky. After touching the golden golems not only slowed down their movements, but when 1,000 of them raised their weapons to slash, they could not move anymore as they were turned into frozen statues. Xietain seized the opportunity, and as he held the greatsword in his right hand and slashed to his side, he shouted out loud, "Void Fist!" His now free left hand clenched into a firm fist, and at the speed of light Xietain struck 100 times with all his strength on the same point. Boom! 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 At the same time that, under the ferocious swing of Xietain, Crimson Thunder Dragon's last words wreaked havoc on the right side of the battlefield and destroyed thousands of golems with its power. The skill Void Fist did not lag behind and changed the left side into a hell of flying junk. Blizzard! Shangguan Bingshue naturally wasn't going to let Xietain do all the work. She immediately activated Blizzard, and at the same time she gracefully slashed forward. From the blade of her sword shot out a giant wave of icy wind that quickly spread to practically every place on the square in front of her. Swoosh! All the golden golems that had not been destroyed by the 2 attacks from Xietain or the resulting aftershocks immediately froze in their tracks. However, this only lasted for a brief instant, as the skill Blizzard was a skill that had no way of containing a second-order existence for more than a second due to its scattered magical power. But a brief instant was all that was needed for a powerhouse like Shangguan Bingshue, who possessed the ability and power to deal with third-order existences. She narrowed her eyes dangerously and chanted in an ice-cold voice, "Inferno!" A glowing orange-colored magic circle appeared on the ground and in a breath grew to over 200 meters in diameter. The golden golems were about to begin their charge when a giant tornado of fire swallowed their bodies, and from the outside their silhouettes were barely visible, writhing for a brief moment before disappearing as if they had vanished. This skill. Xietain looked over his shoulder at her with astonishment on his face. This skill was given to me by Qinhe since it didn't suit him and his battle style at all. Shangguan Bingshue shrugged and calmly explained, "The scroll fell after that guy who almost set the whole forest on fire at Camp Baiquan died." Oh. Xietain nodded carelessly. He could vaguely remember that arrogant soul evolver who, despite being as weak as an ant, dared to challenge him but actually couldn't even overcome the shock of seeing his fire being devoured by the endless blue lotus flame before finally being killed by Qinhe. The face of Shangguan Bingshue shone under the glow of the burning flames that continued to incinerate the golden golems that stupidly charged forward as she slowly explained, "If it was before, I definitely wouldn't have learned a fire-type skill since it might weaken my ice-type ones. After all, skills are attached to our souls, and from a certain point of view, we are our skills. But after advancing to the second order and obtaining Spirit of Ice, I don't need to worry about such things." "I see." Xietain nodded, noticing how slowly the fire tornado over half a kilometer high began to weaken and lose altitude, as well as power. "But, that fireboy had such a strong skill?" Shangguan Bingshue rolled her eyes and said with fake pain, "I naturally evolved the original skill. Besides, are you comparing me to a nobody? You hurt my feelings." "Ha ha ha. Sorry." While the two were casually chatting and tearing apart enemies as if they were tearing apart paper ants, those who were watching the ongoing battle from a distance gasped at what they were witnessing. Huge spheres of wind that looked like an active magic skill were being created just by swinging a weapon, a fist the size of a building destroying everything in its path as if it was the hand of God descending from the heavens, spears of ice raining down from the clouds and gusts of wind freezing everything in its path, tornadoes of fire that incinerated everything it touched without leaving a trace of its existence. This. Sun Ling looked wide-eyed into the distance, and when she tried to put into words the shock she felt in her heart, she failed miserably. But in fact, everyone felt the same way. Bing Shui? Qin he muttered in shock as he looked at the goddess of ice and fire crushing golden golems as if crushing second-order powerhouses was nothing more than a matter of hand swinging for her. Qin he was not surprised that Bai Zemin was treating second-order golden golems with such ease. At the end of the day, he had given up trying to comprehend how strong that young man who a couple of months ago was a nobody in his eyes was. However, Qin he was definitely in disbelief at the battle power that Shangguan Bing Shui was displaying. If you want to read more chapters, visit PA-NDA novel, c.o.m. The power of the current Shangguan Bing Shui did not seem to be even a whit below Bai Zemin's terrifying power. How could such a thing even be possible? Qin he did not understand, he had no way of understanding how the distance that he thought was not so great had actually now become so colossal. But in fact, just as for Bai Zemin his early confrontation against the first-order blazing beetle was a turning point, for Shangguan Bing Shui her breaking point was when she stubbornly decided to follow Bai Zemin and invade Oblong World, obtaining over 80% of the level 99 Giant Eagle's soul power while she was only level 50. Those two. Are they even human? Feng Hong gulped as he watched the flaming vortex finally die down, revealing nothing but metal puddles now scorched and stuck to the stone floor. We fight alongside such divine figures? A soldier muttered in shock. The soldier's words were precisely the words they were all wondering in their hearts. What they were seeing, the death of thousands of powerhouses comparable to second-order soul evolvers, was by far millions of times more shocking than watching Bai Zemin annihilate the weaver ants. The face of Feng Tianwu was pale, but her eyes sparkled with desire and steadfastness as she watched the bright flames finally extinguish after incinerating everything in their path. Only she knew her own thoughts and doubts or resolutions at this moment. Boom, boom, boom. The explosions continued and the golden golems were turned into trash under Bai Zemin's sword or frozen statues that were subsequently shattered by Shangguan Bing Shui. Xietain, who believed that her cursed healer class would be crucial in this assault on the fourth pagoda due to its unique and special characteristics, watched in shock and wide-eyed as for 5 minutes the two young people in front of her seemed to become gods with divine powers or supreme beings who decided who lived or who died with a few words or a wave of their hands. Xietain had always been very proud at heart. Her cursed healer class allowed her to borrow some of her teammates' power, temporarily rob her enemies of part of their stats, heal based on % health, apply curses of all kinds such as blindness, and more. She was basically a pious existence that not even Wu Keqian dared to disrespect in the slightest. However, Xietain realized that she still had a long way to go when it came to true power. Even if she was confident that with Wu Keqian and Sun Yun they would be able to win against Bai Zemin and Shangguan Bing Shui, the risk was too high considering how good synergy the two of them had. One could crush anything his weapon touched while the other could freeze enemies in their tracks with a single magic skill. Such a duo was truly horrible to face. 5 minutes later and after taking out what seemed to be at least a few 100,000 golden golems between the two of them, Shangguan Bing Shui's pretty face was sickly pale. Although she could annihilate thousands of second-order powerhouses that could not reason or think of strategies and had no skills such as the golden golems, it was exhausting in the short term to consume so many quantities of mana abruptly. Phew. Looks like that was the last wave? Bai Zemin released the oxygen from his lungs and rested the weight of his greatsword on the stone floor as he looked at the surroundings cautiously. It seems so. Shangguan Bing Shui frowned as she felt that something did not seem right even though there were indeed no more enemies appearing. Bai Zemin nodded. He was about to take a step forward when he suddenly noticed something that made his movements freeze. Contrary to what he was going to do, he quickly leaped back and raised his weapon in front of him. Shangguan Bing Shui and Xietain subconsciously leaped backward and raised their guard to the maximum as they followed Bai Zemin's eyes into the open pagoda door. Who's in there? Bai Zemin shouted after several seconds of silence. Actually, he didn't know what was going on at all. The only reason he knew something was wrong was because his danger sense skill was warning him, but mainly because the magic circle under his feet was still pale blue and not light green. This meant there were still enemies to face. His words surprised everyone and for several seconds they went unanswered. However, a few seconds later, a cheerful and jovial laugh from the darkness of the pagoda rang out across the stone square. He. Young one, despite being so strong you are actually so cautious. Not bad, I like you. Followed by the sound of footsteps echoing amidst the silence, a silhouette slowly revealed itself beyond the darkness. My name is Kong Guiying, and I am the last trial you must face. As for my scale of power, I would say it is somewhere around level 400? I think you could consider me a fourth-order existence. Chapter 665, King Kong Change of Rules. The person who appeared in front of the group of three led by Xietain was actually a man that looked slightly aged, even though his hair was not completely white. Gray hair was visible for the most part, and at the edge of his eyes, several wrinkles could be seen accumulating. Wearing a deep green armor that perfectly matched the silver shoulder pads and cloak of the same color as the armor, the aura surrounding the person who had just identified himself as Kong Guiying could have been extraordinary and praiseworthy were it not for the terror that his presence alone exuded. The atmosphere around Kong Guiying seemed to be trembling slightly, and with each step he took, the ground shuddered slightly for an instant before returning to normal for a second only to tremble again with his next step. Shangguan Bingshui and Xia froze as they looked at those deep black eyes on Kong Guiying's face. The two women looked like they were about to be devoured by two black holes as the fear quickly began to take over their bodies with each step the being before them took. Fourth order? Xietain frowned sharply, and as he looked at Kong Guiying he couldn't help but compare the aura of the man in front of him with the aura of Emperor Thanath of the Azura race and Emperor Jack of the Ghost race, both fourth-order existences, rulers of the Oblong world. Kong Guiying stopped his movements more than 300 meters away from the trio, and as if responding to Xietan's words, he nodded. You could say that in the past I was a fourth-order existence, in fact. In the past? Xietan's ears perked up at those words, and somehow he now understood some things he could feel from the soul power of the man in front of him. Do you see this? Kong Guiying pointed out as he raised his right arm so that the descending sun was partially covered by it. Or so it should have been. Xietain, Shangguan Bingshui, and Xia were astonished to see how the sun that should have been partially covered by Kong Guiying's arm from the angle at which they were looking actually did not seem to encounter any obstacle. In fact, now that the three of them had a better look, they realized that the rays of sunlight seemed to pass through Kong Guiying's body as if there was nothing in its path. The man didn't even have a shadow. Are you a ghost? Xietain asked in amazement at the same time as he subtly tried with one hand to gesture to the two women behind him to indicate them to step back. Shangguan Bingshui and Xia immediately nodded silently and gradually began to distance, but with their eyes still fixed on the mysterious man who had just stepped out of the fourth pagoda. After all, even if they had not yet been attacked, Kong Guiying had already told them that he was the last trial they had to pass, so even if they were now chatting in a friendly way, it was only a matter of time before the flames of war would erupt. And unfortunately, even Xietain had little if anything to do here. Not only did he not have the 20% increase in his overall strength from the title Destroyer of Destroyers, but the current Xietain did not even have the 65% increase in strength that the skill God of War's will could give him after killing enemies. After all, golems were not naturally born beings, they had no soul power and thus no soul and no records. Golems were just empty shells that had nothing to offer except headaches for their opponents. Even if Kong Guiying seemed weaker compared to the two fourth-order existences that Xietain met in the past, an existence that surpassed him by at least 350 levels was not something that Xietain could face in any way. Kong Guiying chuckled as he watched the two women back away, but he did nothing to stop them as his attention was focused on Xietain. Young warrior, would you mind telling me what year of the sage calendar we are in? This. Xietain hesitated for a moment before replying in an honest and respectful voice, Elder, this junior is only a little over 20 years old this year. But actually, in the over 2,000 years of the recorded or known history of our human race, there is no information of any sage calendar. Xietain noticed the expression on Kong Guiying's face frozen for a second before returning to normal after he said those words. I see. Kong Guiying sighed and a peculiar glint flashed in his lonely eyes as he muttered to himself with a hint of self-deprecation. It seems like a lot of great events happened after this old man went to sleep. Of course. Then, Kong Guiying looked at Xietain again, and as if nothing had happened, he questioned. Just now, you said that you are a little over 20 years old. Is that right? That is correct. Xietain nodded with a serious expression on his face. It's quite good that you're already touching the second order despite being so young. But the most amazing thing is the purity of your soul power. Kong Guiying looked genuinely surprised as he looked Xietain from head to toe and slowly said, You should have killed at least a couple of first-order existences while you were still a little unclassified, shouldn't you? And for your soul power to be so pure, at the very least the amount of help you received could be ignored. Xietain said nothing. In fact, at this entire moment, He held his greatsword high with both feet positioned to attack, defend, or retreat in any instance. After all, he and Kong Guiying were not allies even if they were not exactly enemies either. Kong Guiying took the silence of the young man in front of him as a positive answer, so he couldn't help but praise him in an honest voice. For you, despite being so young, to be able to wait so long just to hunt down the right enemy at the right time. Then, he sighed and shook his head. What a shame. A warrior with such a bright future is destined to fall here? I'm sorry, but I have no intention of falling yet. Xietain replied in a louder voice this time. His eyes sparkled with fighting intent, but mostly with a will to live, as he said in a firm voice that was filled with resolve. I, Xietain, stepped onto the path of evolution less than 3 months ago, but I have killed tens of thousands of enemies of a higher level than mine. I risked my life to the point where every part of my body can remember a different pain, all for the sake of surviving to find those I love and fulfill my promise. A sound of surprise escaped from Kong Guiying's half-open mouth. He seemed to ignore most of what he heard and instead focused on a small detail that caught his attention. What did you say? You started evolving only 3 months ago? This thing called Soul Record, whatever it is, came to our world exactly 2 months and 3 weeks ago. All evolved beings, regardless of whether it is a mutant beast, mutant plant, goblin, human, sea creature, or any other race I have yet to see, have begun evolving 2 months and 3 weeks ago at most. Xietain replied in a deep voice, and it wasn't hard to notice the shock on the face of the man a couple of 100 meters ahead of him. How is this possible? Kong Guiying muttered with lost eyes and surprise flashing in his gaze. He was a man who had seen everything during his lifetime. To Kong Guiying, reading a young man like Xietain was really as easy as knowing when a baby was sad or happy. Precisely for that reason, Kong Guiying was 100% sure that this young man in front of him was not lying. However, if what the young warrior in front of him was saying was true, Kong Guiying did not understand what was happening. He scanned the surroundings, felt the mana of the world, tried to find an answer. But he didn't succeed. All Kong Guiying received in return for his curiosity were more doubts and questions. Why was the Earth close to its second stage? Why had the goblins already appeared if the world had not even advanced to the second stage? Why had humans and sea creatures already come into contact? Why was the mana of the world so low but astonishingly pure? Hundreds and hundreds of questions filled Kong Guiying's head, but each of them had no answers. Worse yet, Kong Guiying knew that the people in front of him could not give him the explanations he wanted to hear, and the time he had left was not enough to find them on his own. This fourth trial was supposed to be a clash between the remnants of me and the challengers. Kong Guiying muttered, looking at the ground before raising his head and looking at Xietain with serious eyes. But it looks like things need to change now. The expression of Xietain and the others brightened as they heard Kong Guiying's words. Didn't it mean that at least now they had a better chance of getting out of here alive? But Xietain and the others had already experienced a lot. Everyone here was people who would never let their guard down just because of a couple of words. Elder, what do you mean? Xietain asked cautiously. As you must well know by now, this old man is in fact already dead, and what you see now is nothing but the shadow of what I used to once be. Kong Guiying said in a serious and deep voice. The ancient ruins were built by me and my subordinates after defeating the king of an enemy kingdom and suffering a mortal wound that left me with less than 20 years of life remaining. After building the ruins, I used the 4th order soul stone that I obtained from the enemy king, and with the help of the strongest mage in the Kong kingdom, my consciousness was moved to that soul stone so that the power within the 4th order soul stone would be consumed bit by bit and then quickly once a challenger emerged. Kong Guiying explained. Xietain and the others were hugely shocked to hear what Kong Guiying was saying. The man before them, if any doubts still needed to be cleared up, had just answered that indeed, at some point on the face of the earth 4th order existences walked. Xietain, how is the situation of the world at present? Kong Guiying suddenly asked, before realizing that with only 3 months of evolution it was impossible for the young man in front of him to know how the world was doing. Therefore, he rephrased his previous question immediately. Technology, weaponry, show me something. Xietain quickly waved his right hand, and with a faint glow from his spatial storage ring, a heat-sensing self-guided anti-tank missile appeared on the ground in front of him. This weapon is a Hongjian 12 or HJ-12 for short. Xietain explained in a serious voice. Elder, among the weapons that a human can carry by itself and leaving aside larger-sized vehicles, this weapon can be considered as one of the most powerful weapons that exist in the world. It has the capability of destroying even battle tanks, which are the most powerful ground vehicles. Pure bullshit. Kong Guiying spat with wide eyes as he looked at the anti-tank missile on the ground. That thing couldn't even destroy a Western Kingdom's vanguard vehicle. This. Bai Zemin was a bit at a loss for words at the sudden outburst of the man in front of him. In fact, he had no idea what Kong Guiying was talking about. Kong Guiying took a deep breath and quickly regained his composure as he quietly said, "It seems that the situation of our human race is not looking good at all." Bai Zemin smiled bitterly and shook his head, "Far from looking good. During these 3 months I have managed to conquer practically 2 districts of our motherland and gather most of the mankind that once inhabited them, but I barely found just over 300,000 when there should be a few million at the very least." As Bai Zemin talked about the zombies and the abnormally fast evolving speed of the other races, the expression on Kong Guiying's face grew uglier and uglier with every word he heard. "All right, I understand." Kong Guiying took another deep breath and nodded earnestly. He looked at Bai Zemin for several seconds before saying in a soft voice, "Young Zemin, you are the most outstanding talent I have seen in my more than 300 years of life and even now after death. A person like you, a young man, must definitely have ambitions, mustn't he?" "Yes." Bai Zemin nodded without hesitation and answered honestly, "I have the intention to regain our lands in the shortest amount of time possible and build a safe place for our countrymen. I will become the king of these lands and lead our people to heights never seen before." "Ha ha ha ha. Heights never seen before, those words are pretty big." Kong Guiying laughed out loud as if he had heard some kind of funny joke. However, judging from the satisfied expression on his face, it seemed to be that Bai Zemin's words pleased him quite a bit. But Kong Guiying would probably try to slap Bai Zemin to death if he heard that in reality, reclaiming the lands of China and reuniting the country's mankind was actually Bai Zemin's smallest goal among his biggest goals. If Kong Guiying knew that Bai Zemin aspired to rule the world and later even the universe, he would probably kill him thinking that it was not good for a lunatic to rule and lead the Chinese who were clearly somehow part of what was once the Kong kingdom that Kong Guiying built. Suddenly, Kong Guiying stopped laughing and his murderous intent grew exponentially as he said in a deep and powerful voice, "In theory, I should do my best to defeat and kill the challengers, since if even my remnant self is able to defeat them, it means that the challengers don't have the qualifications to obtain the treasures in these ruins. But considering all the strange events that are going on and the mysteries that are probably being engineered behind the curtain, I think I need to change the rules a bit." "Change the rules?" Bai Zemin was slightly startled and a glimmer of hope flared in his heart. The current him definitely had no way of defeating a fourth-order existence no matter how weakened it was. At most, Bai Zemin could give a fourth-order existence several considerably serious wounds using overlap regeneration or crimson blood judgment in case he could prepare the attack. But he definitely could not win, and he knew it. Therefore, any rule change was good in this situation. Even more so when Kong Guiying clearly seemed to be a smart and sensible person who cared about his kind. Chapter 666, title spoiler at the end of the chapter. Bai Zemin, instead of defeating me for the privilege of obtaining what is hidden in the last ruin, I will change the plans for the sake of our motherland and our people, as well as for the greater good of mankind. Kong Guiying said in an indifferent voice. Then, Bai Zemin noticed how the man who had once been the ruler of millions and an existence that definitely no one would dare to disrespect closed his eyes, and for several seconds there was no movement on his part. Just as Bai Zemin and the others were wondering what was happening, Kong Guiying opened his eyes again. However, when his black eyes opened, it was not difficult to notice a fatal change in his person. The previously deep eyes now looked tired, the firm stance inside that green-colored armor wavered, and clearly against his will to look weak he took 2 steps back before he could stand his ground. Bai Zemin frowned slightly and was about to say something, but Kong Guiying seemed to see through his thoughts, so he beat him to it. "Come on, come over here and attack with everything you have, or otherwise, I'll attack you," Kong Guiying said in a voice lower and more hesitant than usual. "My current self has only 500 seconds in this world before what's left of my soul disperses forever. If you manage to withstand 2 attacks from me or persist for those 500 seconds, whichever comes first doesn't matter, if you succeed, this will be your victory." Actually, from many points of view, the 500 seconds option was better when compared to taking 2 attacks from a frighteningly powerful being like Kong Guiying head-on, and that was the precise reason why he mentioned it. The sudden turn naturally caught Bai Zemin off guard and he subconsciously shook his head and said in a heavy voice, "Elder, there really is no other way? Besides, you really are dead?" This was the first time Bai Zemin hoped that he would not have to raise his weapon against a living being. Although Kong Guiying and he had only known each other for a few minutes so far, Bai Zemin really appreciated the kind of person Kong Guiying was. Kong Guiying had created these ruins and had locked part of his soul in a 4th-order soul stone using a forbidden spell, all for the sake of finding a worthy successor to what had been the once glorious Kong kingdom that Kong Guiying himself had raised from the ground with his own efforts. However, that same Kong Guiying was willing to go against his dying wish for the sake of supporting the evolution of his race and helping to save as many human lives as possible. Bai Zemin not only did not want to fight against Kong Guiying but despite knowing that such a thing was not possible, in some corner of his heart he hoped that the old man in front of him was actually alive and that what he was seeing was not a remnant of what he had once been. But what nonsense are you spouting, brat? Kong Guiying's expression hardened and the atmosphere around him changed. His green boots suddenly began to shine as he roared, no matter who the enemy is an enemy and for you to live your enemies must fall. Suddenly and without warning, Kong Guiying's body seemed to disappear from its previous position, causing Bai Zemin's pupils to shrink to the maximum degree possible as every hair on his body stood on, and as when a cat sensed mortal danger hovering over it. There was no sound of whistling wind and no afterimage. Kong Guiying actually disappeared from his previous position, even Bai Zemin saw no shadow of him. But considering how high the agility of Bai Zemin was, even if he was not able to keep track of a fourth-order existence, he should be able to see at least a flash of light moving for a second in his direction. Therefore, it was not difficult to conclude that Kong Guiying had used some teleportation or similar skill. Overlap regeneration. Bai Zemin didn't even have to think about it as his instinct and body moved first than his mind. In record time, he activated the only skill that at this moment could get him out of the trouble he was in, and without hesitation, he took directly 1,200 points of his natural stamina and changed it into 1,200 points of pure strength. With no time to activate any more skills and unable to retreat, Bai Zemin raised his greatsword until the tip of Crimson Thunder Dragon's last words pointed skyward before using his now over 2,000 points of pure strength to slash downward without hesitation, causing the space around him to rumble slightly. It was just at that moment when Kong Guiying punching his right fist forward appeared only a meter far away from Bai Zemin. Surprisingly, when the fist covered by a pair of green gloves matching the armor met the heavy giant sword head-on, there was no terrifying explosion and in fact, for a few moments, everything seemed silent and calm. However, no one was foolish enough to think that this was the end. Everyone knew in their hearts that it was merely the calm before the lashing of the storm. The eyes of Kong Guiying widened slightly and a flash of amazement flashed in his dark pupils as he gazed in awe at the golden aura around Bai Zemin. Although the current Kong Guiying was nothing more than a remnant soul thread, his conscience was still the conscience of a powerful fourth-order existence, so his mind could process colossal amounts of information in record time. Kong Guiying could feel how the weight of the weapon seemed to be multiplying as it met his right fist. He could also feel how at astonishingly fast speeds the weight of the weapon and its terrifying physical attack power in conjunction with a titanic amount of strength that should not belong to a first-order existence began to race throughout his arm. Kong Guiying felt all that in less than a split second and a trace of a smile appeared on his progressively more and more wrinkled face. Double strength. Kong Guiying's voice hadn't finished falling when what everyone knew would happen soon finally broke loose. Boom! Followed by an explosion of proportions never before seen by anyone except Shangguan Bingshui, who had witnessed Bai Zemin's most powerful crimson blood judgment in Oblong World. A huge shockwave over 10 kilometers in diameter swept across the square. The ground rumbled as if the end of the world was approaching, and the stone square, as well as the pagodas that until now had not suffered the slightest damage, began to crack violently as if they were going to collapse at any moment. 90% of the people present fainted at the mere sound of the explosion, and all of them had blood coming out of their ears. Just when everyone expected to be hit by the shockwave that was approaching at lightning speed with pale faces as they knew well what it meant to be hit by the aftershock of an attack of such a magnitude, the magic circle drawn around the entire stone square released a powerful white radiance that surprisingly absorbed the remaining energy from the result of the clash between two terrifying powerhouses. Bai Zemin had no idea what had happened after he swung his weapon, as in just a second the entire world around him suddenly became a blur, and all he knew was that at some point the grip on his weapon had loosened. However, for those who were still up and awake, what they saw made their hearts sink to the bottom of the abyss. Especially Lilith, Shangguan Bingshui, Zhongde, Nangang Lingxin, and Kai Jingyi, who upon seeing Bai Zemin being sent flying backwards like a kite whose string had been cut, their faces turned white as ghosts. Shangguan Bingshui was the first one to react, and her instinct immediately led her to run after the human body that like a rag doll hit by a truck was being sent flying until it finally stopped after hitting what seemed to be a huge light-colored glowing cocoon. Boom! The energy dome that was meant to ward off unintelligent beings, mitigate incoming damage, and prevent the challenger from escaping so easily, shuddered ferociously when Bai Zemin's body hit it straight on. PFFFFFFFFFTT. Just at the moment of his back against the wall of energy, several spurts of dark red blood flew out of Xietan's mouth, and among them, there was no shortage of fragments of broken organs. But far from feeling pain, he felt nothing at all as he fell to the ground like a dead body. He, despite feeling no pain, knew that his present condition was so miserable that it could not be worse. His consciousness, surprisingly, had not shut down even though his eyes were trying to close and trying to force him to rest as if they were telling him that he had already given enough. He could even feel someone shouting his name, but Xietain could not see the other person because his eyes were covered with blood and all he could see was a red world in front of him. Still, it was not difficult for him to decipher who that someone was since there was only one person in the world with a jasmine scent as pure and rich as hers. This was the second time Xietain experienced the power of a fourth-order soul evolver, the first time being when Emperor Jack easily created a hole in his chest with a single blow. At that time, Phantom Emperor Jack clearly had not intended to kill Xietain or else he would not be here today to tell the tale. However, it was clear that Kong Guiying did not hold back when he attacked. Without any benefit of titles or skills like God of War's will, Xietain was no different from an ant before the power of a fourth-order existence. He believed that even if Kong Guiying had given him time to trigger Crimson Flame the result would have been the same. Xietain did not know, but it was actually a miracle that he was still alive, and what had saved him was his health comparable to that of an early-stage third-order mutant beast, as well as his rushed attack that managed to mitigate a great deal of Kong Guiying's attack. Even so, the bones of his arms had broken into countless pieces, more than 8 of his ribs had fractured into at least 4 pieces each, and his internal organs suffered severe damage due to the power of the impact. The current him could not get up on his feet again even if he wished to. I lose. I see. I really did lose. Xietain felt himself slowly falling further and further into what seemed to be a thick dark fog that drew him in second by second. But, I'm really not willing after all. There was something in him that still clung to the thin pin thread that remained to him as life. Xietain wanted to believe that as long as he was alive there was hope to win, hope to survive and defeat his enemies. He was not aware of what he was doing, maybe he did it by instinct or who knows the real reason, but subconsciously or not. Xietain activated overlap regeneration and turned each of his agility points into health. The characteristic golden radiance that appeared with each activation of overlap regeneration once again enveloped his body, and with now more than double the health of before, his body began to recover, several times faster in comparison. Shangguan Bingshue's face was pale and her beautiful lips had become so discolored that even with her natural beauty it was scary to look directly at her. She didn't even know she was crying, but as she held the gradually getting colder body of Xietain she felt that her own inner self was about to collapse. Even though that wonderful warm golden light covered Xietan's body, and even though she could feel that at least his condition was not getting worse anymore, Shangguan Bingshue was still deathly pale and scared to death. Only those who valued a friendship from the bottom of their heart and cherished it as much as their own life would be able to understand how the current Shangguan Bingshue felt, but even then they would only be able to understand a part of it. Don't worry, Shangguan Bingshue. My man has not lost. That extremely annoying voice and the voice that Shangguan Bingshue was slowly beginning to hate more than anything else echoed in her mind, and for the first time, it didn't sound mocking or disdainful. Shangguan Bingshue had never been so happy to hear Lilith since she met her and had never wanted to see her as much as she did now, so she hurriedly raised her head trying to call out to her, to ask her, to help Xietain. She was willing to even throw her pride away at this moment, nothing mattered more to her. However, before Shangguan Bingshue had a chance to utter a single word, Lilith spoke again. Quickly search for that Xia woman to use her skill on Xietain. We must take advantage now that his consciousness remains awake and the effect of overlap regeneration is going latent. I understood. Shangguan Bingshue nodded, somehow feeling more relieved after hearing the calmness in the voice of Lilith. After laying Xietain carefully on the ground, Shangguan Bingshue activated all her movement skills, disappearing like a ghost from her position. She was going to bring Xia in drag if necessary, and even though she didn't understand what Lilith meant, Shangguan Bingshue only cared about holding on to the hope before her. After all, if Lilith really loved Xietain and if he was about to die, there was no way for her to keep calm, or was there? But in fact, Shangguan Bingshue did not know that in reality, Lilith's face was even paler than hers and the red of her seductive lips had disappeared at this point. It was just that in contrast to Shangguan Bingshue, Lilith had seen each and every person she ever loved dying in some way or another before her without being able to do anything about it, so she could somehow think with clarity even when her heart was in chaos. Besides, the current Lilith was not going to let Xietain die regardless of the consequences. In the past, she had no choice and no one gave her the privilege to choose because she was weak compared to her enemies. so she could only watch as those she loved got devoured or fell under the blade of the swords. But the current her had more than enough strength. If the worst came to the worst, then she would simply interfere, and as punishment, she would fall to the Fourth Order. She was still young, she would not die even after being punished by the soul record. The only reason Lilith had not yet moved was because she believed in Xietain. One of the most important parts of a couple was trust, and Lilith, that had witnessed how that little college student who reacted with fear and shock when he saw his first zombie slowly grow to become one of the most brilliant warriors and mages, believed that he would get back on his feet no matter how crazy it seemed. Maybe it was stupid, but somewhere in her heart, Lilith really hoped that Xietain could stand up and handle this on his own. Because even if he survived, the shock would probably be too hard for such a proud person such as Xietain that walked the path of the undefeatable. For Xietain, the fact that for his sake the woman he was in love with would have to fall from a proud higher existence to a lower existence and lose so many hard-earned levels, would probably be worse than death, and even if he lived, Xietain would definitely not be the same person he was before. Chapter 667, Strange Dream. Kang Guiying watched silently as the events unfolded. But despite the indifferent expression on his face, only he knew that he felt a slight regret in his heart. Just during his previous clash, his first strike, he had planned to refrain himself, and in theory his first attack was going to be an attack to warn Xietain that an enemy was an enemy from the moment they challenged you in any way possible. Kang Guiying wanted Xietain to understand that in this world, friendship was something that all-powerful and supreme beings could afford, and that those who thought that just because someone was their friend would not stab them in the back at the opportune moment, then what awaited them was a rude awakening. Kang Guiying himself lived with that kind of mentality all his life, but in a moment of carelessness in the past, the person he least expected to betray him used the skill Infinite Chains on him while he was fighting against the king of another realm, which led him to suffer the wound from which he was not able to recover and the main reason why he was neither human nor ghost today. However, Kang Guiying made a small mistake. He did not expect the young man who called himself Xietain to be so terrifyingly strong. That golden aura that surrounded him before, that frightening strength capable of rivaling a peak Third Order existence added to the colossal attack power of that giant sword surrounded by crimson lightning caused Kang Guiying to forget for an instant that the person he was facing was a First Order existence, and as someone who had fought all his life was excited for a good fight after only the gods knew how many years of darkness and confinement. Double strength, a skill that multiplies my strength stat by 2 for 10 seconds at the cost of suffering broken bones and tears, but since I have no real physical body it has no side effects on my current self. Kang Guiying muttered under his breath, and a regret-filled sigh slipped from his lips as he watched in the distance as Xietan's immobile body was once again surrounded by that godly golden aura. That skill of that child. It's the first time in my life that I've seen something like that. What a pity, to think that for a moment of carelessness I would end the life of such a talented warrior of my human race. Finally, Kang Guiying shook his head and took a step forward in preparation to end what was left of his last will. At the end of the day, even though it was a pity, he was no longer in existence of this world and really shouldn't interfere too much with things that had little or nothing to do with him. He was already dead, and soon, the last of his soul would also disappear without leaving the slightest trace of his existence. Xietain, Kang Guiying stopped when in the distance he saw a silver silhouette approaching at full speed in his direction. He had no difficulty identifying her as one of the two women who had been standing next to the young warrior from earlier, and from what he had observed from the darkness before, she looked to be a very powerful and talented woman with extraordinary and varied skills that made her a nightmare for anyone on the battlefield. Unfortunately, seeing her pale face and hesitant look, Kang Guiying knew immediately that she was powerless at the moment. What a shame. If she could take an attack from me or persist 400 seconds it would be her team's victory. Kang Guiying sighed again as he shook his head. There was something that perhaps Xietain and everyone else had misunderstood, or perhaps due to the shock he received after learning what was happening on the current Earth, Kang Guiying forgot to explain himself more clearly. This trial was a trial of challengers since Xietain had stormed the fourth pagoda as a team with two people. So, even if the two women helped him before, Kang Guiying would have no complaints, much less considering that they were simply two second-order existences and one first-order. Regardless, Shangguan Bingshui did not look at Kang Guiying at any time, even though deep in her heart she wished nothing more than to bring him back to life and be able to tear every fragment of his body into a million pieces. Her heart felt too heavy to care about anything other than saving Xietan's life. Xietain was frozen in fear at this point. She had not moved from her place and simply stood there with a completely pale face as she looked at Kang Guiying as if she was looking at a mythological beast that would soon devour the entire world. Even Bai Zemin, who was the most terrifyingly strong person Xia had ever seen in her entire life, was probably already dead after a single punch of the remnant soul thread of the existence in front of her. There was nothing she could do about it. Maybe if she had cast one of her curses earlier the outcome might have been different. But Xia shook her head at such a thought. How could she possibly keep up with the speed of a fourth-order existence that decided to attack out of nowhere? It was impossible. Xia! Shangguan Bingshui shouted through gritted teeth, and a flash of murderous intent shone in her blue eyes as she extended her right hand at lightning speed and tightly squeezed Xiaya's shoulder to the point that the bones crackled slightly as if they might break at any moment. What? Xia immediately turned around. The pain in her right shoulder, as well as the chilling cry, brought her out of her daze, and when she turned around she was met with Shangguan Bingshui's ghost-like pale face. "Cure Bai Zemin, hurry!" Shangguan Bingshui said loudly in an authoritative voice, and in fact did not even wait for confirmation from Xia. "Cure? Right, heal." Xia immediately regained some of her reason when she suddenly felt the world around her become a blur. Everything around her flashed and her body felt lighter, but before she could fully regain herself the scene in front of her changed. "Cure him," Shangguan Bingshui ordered in a cold voice, and her expression was as hard as stone as she pointed at Bai Zemin on the ground. She even drew her sword and glared at Xia without caring about anything other than forcing her to do whatever she had to do regardless of what was right or wrong. Xia quickly nodded and took out a bright white first-order soul stone. She took out a golden magic wand without saying a word, and after bringing the soul stone close to the wand, all its energy was soon sucked out to the point where the rock exploded and turned into a pile of useless dust. Xia hesitated for a moment, but finally gritted her teeth, and while pointing the golden wand towards Bai Zemin she chanted loudly, "Healing of the cursed." Immediately after those words left her mouth, Xiaya's face turned pale and her eyes trembled at the same time as several beads of sweat began to slide down her lovely body. Shangguan Bingshui frowned as she saw that Xia seemed to be in great pain, but upon feeling the sound of bones rattling on the ground and after realizing that Xiaya's skill together with Bai Zemin's golden aura were working perfectly in sync, she did not care whatever was happening to Xia. At the end of the day, Xia to her was simply an unknown woman, and between her and a precious friendship, there was no doubt who Shangguan Bingshui would choose. Healing of the cursed. Healing of the cursed. In a span of 30 seconds, Xia activated her skill 3 times. However, she seemed to be on the verge of collapsing, as at this moment her eyes were wavering, and if not for Shangguan Bingshui who had supported her in time she might have fallen to the ground. Her skill Healing of the Cursed allowed her to heal those she identified as her allies. This skill tripled the target's health stat for 5 seconds, which naturally greatly accelerated the healing speed depending on the other's health. However, Xia suffered horribly every time she used this skill. The first activation of Healing of the Cursed caused Xia to experience 20% of the pain the target felt, the second activation forced her to experience 30%, the third 40%, and so on up to a maximum of 80%. Healing of the Cursed was really an obscure skill, as it did not even harm the caster, but it also did not allow Xia to faint, so her mind was really experiencing a monstrous amount of pain right now. She didn't even understand how it was possible that someone could still be alive with Bai Zemin's wounds and with the pain that should have forced him to faint as the mind's safety system. In the distance, Kong Guiying felt the fast improvement of Bai Zemin and raised an eyebrow in astonishment, before a smile of happiness crossed his face for an instant. "Oh? This little lady seems to have some good skills too. That's good, that's good. Now I just hope that child can stand up soon." Kong Guiying still had about 300 seconds left, and he did not mind waiting until the last moment. Although he did not believe that someone could get up after suffering such huge damage, Kong Guiying waited for a miracle. Bai Zemin could feel the bones in his body twisting, he felt his torn flesh begin to be reattached by new tissue, even the birth of new cells did not go unnoticed. However, despite the pain he should be feeling, he felt nothing. In fact, Bai Zemin subconsciously even used blood manipulation to promote the movement of stem cells and birth of others, while at the same time he activated overlap regeneration from time to time and converted all his agility into health points. At this moment he should be experiencing at least several times more pain than when Kong Lan healed him after he returned safely from Oblong World. However, far from feeling any pain, he felt nothing. This was because before his eyes, an unfamiliar scene was taking place, just like a movie that was cut into parts and without much clarity. A pair of slender hands appeared and could only be described as extremely beautiful, surrounded by a mysterious light and strange energy. One finger in particular bore a ring that had been carved in the shape of a dragon. But these beautiful hands carried a sharp knife that cut open the stomach of the baby lying on a soft bed, causing blood to gush out. The baby let out a wail. The hands did not stop for the baby's cry and instead continued to move as if searching for something until finally they seemed to find what they were looking for as the owner of the hands laughed gleefully as it pulled out a weird rainbow-colored bone the size of a fingernail. That bone was very small, but somehow, it was not tainted by the slightest drop of blood. It glittered brightly and even possessed some natural glowing lines. After that, a bottle appeared in one of the hands and, quickly, a small ball of gas was sealed inside. Soon after, a syringe appeared in the other hand, piercing the baby's heart. Fresh blood filled it. This blood did not look the same as ordinary blood. Instead of being scarlet, it was rainbow-colored just like the little bone from before. After the multicolored blood was drawn, the baby's body immediately darkened as if a shiny jade vase had suddenly become worn and cracked. Then, that person laughed again and as it raised the knife high, the dragon ring on its hand flashed reflecting the sunlight before cutting downward. Chapter 668, Final Clash Against the Fourth Order. When the knife fell, the vision of Baizemin darkened for an instant. He didn't know what was happening or what had happened, but when he opened his eyes, all Baizemin noticed was the cold floor and Shangguan Bingshui staring at him with the word relief written all over her face. This was the second time Baizemin had such a strange dream, with the first time being the one when he had finally managed to relax while taking a hot bath. However, unlike the first dream, this second dream was a lot more mysterious and unclear in comparison. Who was that baby? Who was the owner of those hands? Why was that person doing something so bad to a newborn who was clearly not even a year old? What was that little rainbow bone? Why was the baby's blood multicolored? What was the little ball of gas that came out of the baby's body and the person with the ring stored in a bottle? Many questions filled Baizemin's head for a second. However, he soon remembered the situation he was in and everything changed as those questions strangely mixed with the situation he was facing and a strange feeling began to grow in his heart. His previous confrontation against Kong Guiying. The greatest humiliation of his entire life. Baizemin had not even been so badly beaten at the hands of Emperor Jack despite the fact that at that moment he was weaker in comparison to his current one. A single punch from Kong Guiying was enough to send him flying and bring him to the brink of death. But, if he died, didn't that mean everyone here would die too? What would happen to Meng Qi then? There was also Shangguan Bingshui, Wu Yijuan, Qin He, Kai Jingyi, Nan Gonglingxin, Zhongde. All of them believed and trusted him in their respective ways but trust in the end. Baizemin clenched his teeth and without saying a single word fought to stand up. His bones that had just been reformed and fused together did not feel as firm as they should, his internal organs were still damaged, his legs were trembling. His whole body was still in the process of healing. But he didn't care, and even when the veins in his arms exploded and blood began to pour down the cracks of his armor that had practically turned into scrap metal, the only goal in the mind of Baizemin was to get back on his feet and return to the battlefield. This was his battlefield, it belonged to him. Shangguan Bingshui wanted to stop him as even with Xia Ye's help it was clear that Baizemin had not recovered 100%. However, she choked with her words just as she was about to say them after looking at Baizemin's cold expression. It's good that you were able to stand up. I only have 250 seconds left, and if you didn't make it, I would have had to kill you and everyone in this place. The voice of Kong Guiying rang throughout the square like a clap of thunder. I hope you understand. What I am doing now is already against my principles and will of the last breath. I'm sorry for keeping you waiting. Baizemin replied in a calm manner and extended his right hand to the right side of the stone square. Swoosh! The wind suddenly swooshed loudly followed by small explosions. Under the startled gaze of everyone, a giant sword flew through the sky spinning uncontrollably like a wheel and slashing toward Baizemin. Bang! A low explosion sounded as Crimson Thunder Dragon's last words went inside the grip of Baizemin's right hand followed by another more powerful explosion as he let the weight of the weapon pull his arm down and allowed the tip to rest on the stone floor. Baizemin finally raised his head, and while he looked at Kong Guiying with ice-cold eyes, he said with respect, Elder, I showed you a shameful side of me. Please let me redeem myself with this second attack. Oh ho! The eyes of Kong Guiying shone peculiarly as from the distance his black eyes met a pair of eyes as red as blood itself. A smile slowly formed at the corner of his lips as he said in a low voice but one that strangely echoed throughout the square, I thought this was a hopeless case due to a mistake on my part. But seeing how your body's aura keeps increasing, it seems like we're just at the beginning? Baizemin did not reply and instead calmly said, Bingshui, go back with the rest and make an ice barrier strong enough to withstand the aftershock of a nuclear bomb. Shangguan Bingshui's pupils contracted when she heard those words from Baizemin and she couldn't help but point out in a quickened voice, you will use that attack? You can't do it. Not only will you end up getting hurt yourself, but the ear. Bingshui. Shangguan Bingshui jumped on the sight, and when her blue eyes met those red eyes she couldn't help but feel a touch of fear. She had seen the eyes of Bai Zemin turning red twice in the past. Today was the third occasion. During the previous 2 times, Bai Zemin's rationality and cool head that allowed him to think with clarity on the battlefield disappeared to a large extent. Fortunately, however, this time was different. I know what to do and what not to do. Bai Zemin smiled kindly and said in a slightly sweet voice, did I ever let you down? Go, and have confidence in me. This time it was Shangguan Bingshui's heart what jumped for an instant when she heard Bai Zemin's tone of voice. This was the first time he had spoken to her so softly and kindly, as if he was talking to someone really precious and important. He hadn't gone crazy this time. Oh okay. She nodded and yet in a daze walked away with Xia, whose face was pale as a ghost being dragged away. Bai Zemin waved his right hand and using his own blood built a crimson-colored, flat platform under his feet. Under the careful control of blood manipulation, Bai Zemin closed his eyes and allowed the blood platform to lift him into the sky. This kind of action was really exhausting because it was not as simple as creating blood weapons and casually throwing them in an approximate direction. He needed to measure many more things to allow himself to use his blood creations to soar into the skies. Fortunately, Kong Guiying was an enemy different from any other enemy Bai Zemin had faced, and probably different from any other he would face in the future. Kong Guiying was his enemy. But he was also an elder trying to help a junior. In fact, when Kong Guiying saw Bai Zemin rising into the sky slowly and with his eyes closed, he did not move from his position nor did he plan to attack. Even though the time he had left in this world was less than 200 seconds, Kong Guiying did not go crazy trying to make the most of each of those seconds or venting his frustration as anyone would do. He just stood there watching the sky now covered by stars. On the other hand, as he slowly rose to over 600 meters above the ground, Bai Zemin allowed his soul to adjust to the temporal records that had been activated. The safety of your loved ones has been threatened in front of you. The first level of your skill, Blood Berserker's Wrath, has been triggered. Strength 400 and Agility 400. The side effect of the first level, loss of rationality equal to 10%, is weakened by the effect of your title Brilliant Mind by 10%. The rationality loss is weakened by half thanks to the passive effect of your unique skill of 4th order Immovable Heart. The path you walk has been challenged. The second level of your Blood Berserker's Wrath skill has been triggered. Merging benefits of the 2 activated levels. Strength 1000, Agility 1000, Magic 1000, Stamina 1000, Health 1000. For the next 120 seconds, the cooldown times of all your skills will reset to 0 immediately. The side effect of the second level, loss of rationality equivalent to 15%, is weakened by the effect of your title Brilliant Mind by 10%. The rationality loss is weakened by half thanks to the passive effect of your unique skill of 4th order Immovable Heart. Bai Zemin slowly opened his eyes, looking especially striking under the cloak of the moonless night. He currently felt really strange. Bai Zemin felt anger, pain, frustration, desire for revenge, pity, shame, disbelief, doubt, and many more emotions related to the baby, the person, the knife, the beating he was given, and more. However, all those emotions that should have considerably clouded his rationality under the side effect of the skill Blood Berserker's Wrath failed to cloud his mind too much, and in fact, he hardly felt any change at all. Of course, Bai Zemin knew that this was all thanks to the title Brilliant Mind and his skill Immovable Heart. Once again, he realized how frighteningly synchronized his skills were. Everything seemed to be perfectly aligned. He slowly stopped ascending after surpassing 1,000 meters, and as he observed his body, he couldn't help but grimace at how miserable his current appearance was. I really got beaten like a straight dog. Bai Zemin shook his head and silently raised his right hand toward the sky. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. Under the activation of blood manipulation and Bai Zemin's control over the liquid storage pearl, tens of liters of blood floated into the sky, and at astonishing speeds, thousands and thousands of crimson-red spears began to take shape. What is he trying to do? Sun Ling asked with a pale face as she looked up at the sky in persistent fear. The night was moonless that day, but the stars were present. However, above everyone's head, the most striking thing in that black cloak with white freckles were the bright red freckles that were rapidly growing in number and spreading everywhere like an inextinguishable plague. Today would definitely be part of the history and could not be erased from the memories of Sun Ling and everyone else even in the years to come. Shangguan Bingshui did not say a single word. Instead, she lightly clenched her pearly teeth and chanted under her breath, Ice Stronghold. A glowing azure magic circle appeared beneath her feet and under her careful control grew 200 meters before she stopped providing mana for its enlargement. Instead, Shangguan Bingshui began to invest mana to build thick walls 5 meters high and over 120 meters thick along with a roof of over 400 meters of pure ice. Finally, she focused her mana and magic to strengthen the ice stronghold as much as possible, and the walls began to release a faint light blue glow that illuminated the surroundings. At the same time, the resulting frost froze part of the ground only to thaw due to the magic circle in the square, repeating the process over and over again. Bang! 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 Although the sound of explosions coming from the forest could be faintly heard from inside, no one was able to see what was happening outside the ice walls that Shangguan Bingshui had erected to protect everyone. I wish Pei Pei and her skill-shared protecting eyes were here now. Shangguan Bingshui muttered under her breath through clenched teeth as she could do nothing but listen without knowing clearly what was happening in the outside world. A/N, Pei Pei and her skill appeared in chapter 429 if you want to check again. Kong Guiying frowned slightly as he watched the young man's strange movement in the sky. What does he want to do with those pointless attacks? King Kong muttered in confusion. Bang! 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 Blood spears rained down from the sky like torpedoes, causing explosions after falling chaotically everywhere in the forest. The rage-filled roars of the mutant beasts mingled with the howls of pain from others who were hit by the blood spears but did not die immediately. It was not until after about 10 seconds and after the fall of more than 4,000 spears that Kong Guiying returned his focus to Bai Zemin. However, when he once again set his eyes on the young man in the sky, Kong Guiying's eyes widened. What the hell? Why did this kid's aura grow so much? Kong Guiying was truly delighted. The stronger Bai Zemin proved to be, the happier he felt for the future of mankind and the calmer he was knowing that he wasn't making a mistake in wanting to leave the legacy of the Kong kingdom in the young man's hands. Elder Kong, thank you for waiting. Bai Zemin's voice echoed from the sky and stretched for miles across the length and width of the sky. Ha ha ha, kid, this old man thought you'd have me standing here until death. Kong Guiying laughed through his teeth and opened both arms as he said in a loud and cheerful voice that was uncharacteristic of someone about to fade away forever, "Come on, kid. Give me your best shot and don't disappoint these old bones of mine." God of War's will, 65%/65%. Green letters flashed in Bai Zemin's pupils as he shouted out loud, "Don't worry, Elder Kong. This time, I will definitely give you an attack that won't let you down." Under the joyful laughter of the once called King Kong, Bai Zemin shouted in a deep voice, "Crimson Flame!" Bang! Red fire immediately burst out of Bai Zemin's body and under his command surrounded the entire blade of his greatsword, dancing in tandem with the crimson lightning that melted amidst the sea of red flames. But he did not stop there. Endless blue lotus flame! Bang! The deep blue flames merged without fighting against the crimson flame. A purple flame replaced the blue and crimson. As the purple flames burned without damaging the weapon, crimson lightning crackled furiously around as if to prove its presence. Rumble. The atmosphere around Bai Zemin began to rumble after he cancelled the effect of blood manipulation on the platform beneath his feet. After losing the only support holding him up in the sky, his body began to fall slowly and gradually picked up speed, leaving a trace of purple flames and red lightning wherever he crossed. However, Bai Zemin had only fallen a dozen meters when his voice echoed under the night sky. Agility for strength. His body was surrounded by overlap regeneration's characteristic divine golden light and he did not hesitate to change 1900 points of agility for 1900 points of strength. Bai Zemin dash, strength, 3805. Kong Guiying narrowed his eyes and as he watched that brilliant flash of golden light with purple and red flashes dancing around it, he couldn't help but be amazed in his heart as he felt the change in the aura of the young man that was falling straight at him. Very good. Kong Guiying, will show you the respect that a talented warrior like you deserves and will not hold back this time. Power boost. Speed boost. Kong Guiying shouted the name of two skills and his aura immediately shot up. Kid, don't die. Boom. Leaving those words in the wind, Kong Guiying stomped on the ground and shot into the sky to meet the golden flash over 800 meters high and descending. Bai Zemin felt every muscle in his body explode due to the horrendous power pressure he had at this moment. He, who was not fully recovered from his previous wounds, was wielding a completely different power compared to his self before he was battered by Kong Guiying. However, he gritted his teeth and a flash of resolution burned in his demonic red eyes. Gravity manipulation. X30. Bai Zemin's falling speed suddenly shot up and his body turned into a golden blur that left behind several golden light rings with purple mixtures and crackling lightning as a result of the break of the Earth's sound barrier. Kong Guiying was taken by surprise this time, not Bai Zemin. By the time the old man realized it, Xietain was just over his head, a mere 50 meters above him, and slashing with his weapon at him. Double strength! Kong Guiying roared and without hesitation punched upward. At the same time, Xietain roared, rumbling the heavens, shaking the earth. Chapter 669, completely different from what should theoretically happen when two extremely powerful power sources collide with each other. When Crimson Thunder Dragon's last words being wielded by Xietain met the fist of Kong Guiying coated by his rank 4 gauntlets, there was no immediate earth-shaking explosion that shocked the earth and deafened the world. The thunderously fast speed at which Xietain was falling from the sky after the activation of gravity manipulation x 30 times the Earth's gravity was stopped in its tracks, and if a person were to look up at the sky from a distance, they would be able to see a golden-colored dot with red and purple shades floating in the nothingness. You have learned 3rd order active skill level 4, rumbling the heavens, shaking the earth. Xietain was not surprised by the green message that flashed in his retina, and in fact, he was not in the position to care about it. During the first second that the two attacks connected, the red-eyed and black-eyed gazes met in silence. During the second tick of the finest hand on the clock, a huge bubble of vacuum began to grow from the focal point where the great sword and gauntlet joined, spreading rapidly outward in the shape of a sphere. The air and all its components were expelled from the bubble of nothingness, and all matter other than the two powers facing each other high in the sky was destroyed without any resulting sound. By the 3rd second, both Xietain and Kong Guiying began to experience what was the beginning of the end of this short but undoubtedly majestic confrontation never before seen between a 1st order powerhouse and what was once a 4th order powerhouse. Xietain again felt the terror of a 4th order powerhouse as a monstrous amount of force traveled from his greatsword to his hands, easily penetrating his body and beginning to wreak havoc on his not yet fully healed internal organs. But that was not the end, as Xietain could feel his blood vessels exploding one after another, and out of the corner of his eye, he could see huge drops of blood floating inside the bubble of nothingness before being shattered by the silent pressure inside. But Kong Guiying did not take the damage he was inflicting on Xietain for free this time. While Xietain was feeling overwhelming amounts of pain and struggling to maintain his consciousness, Kong Guiying felt for the first time in his life death admiration and even a bit of fear toward a 1st order existence that was barely in his early 20s. The weight of Crimson Thunder Dragon's last words was around 6 tons, but one of its options doubled its weight when it found too much resistance in its cutting trajectory. As if the above was not enough, those 12 tons were powered by an existence whose body held the strength of over 300 men as it fell from over 1,000 meters high at a speed equivalent to 30 times the force of attraction of the world. The rank 4 gauntlet was a weapon that had been forged for Kong Guiying by the best blacksmith in the Kong Kingdom. However, that rank 4 weapon was losing against a rank 3 weapon at this moment. It started with a small silent crack, but in a split second, that small crack spread all over the fist of the gauntlet and was spreading quickly all over its body, even reaching the right arm of the armor. By the 4th second, a strange sound similar to a high-pitched whistle blowing at high frequencies began to be heard inside the bubble of nothingness that, after reaching 400 meters in diameter, stopped spreading, and with its edges now fully visible, it began to contract even faster than its previous growth. By the 5th tick of the clock hand, a kind of black hole with dark lightning and golden edges appeared right in between the two weapons. At the same time, Xietain could do nothing even with blood manipulation to prevent a large torrent of blood from spurting out of his mouth, even though he had his teeth clenched as he activated overlap regeneration for the 8th time in the day to keep his strength at the highest possible level. As for Kong Guiying, half of his body from the waist down had surprisingly disappeared as if it had never been there, just like his armor. Purple flames and crimson lightning spread from his right arm to every part of his body, burning his soul and speeding up his demise forever. There was no blood, it just disappeared. What a shame. Kong Guiying sighed with a regretful expression on his face. At first, Xietain did not understand what the words of Kong Guiying meant. However, the next moment his expression, which until now was as hard as a rock trying to push down his enemy, changed. Rumble. It started with a very small and almost inaudible rumble. However, in a matter of fractions of a second, that rumbling began to spread everywhere. At the same time, before Xietain or Kong Guiying could do anything to stop it, the bubble of nothingness had finally compressed to its maximum, and then happened what by nature took place when anything of large size and density was compressed beyond what its laws allowed it to do. Boom! Ugh! Xietain frowned hard as the armor on his arms exploded, revealing his arms not so pleasing to the eye due to all the blood and flesh revealed underneath the shredded skin. However, the shockwave that swept the sky and wiped away the few clouds within 100 kilometers around did not manage to push back Zemon's body at all, and he continued to push down hard with resolution in his pain-filled gaze. He knew that this was his last chance. If Zemon failed now, then there was no turning back. Therefore, even if his soul was torn apart, he had to endure. The shockwave swept the nearby trees, detaching them from the earth and tearing them apart. The mutant beasts that were hunting or just resting were not even aware of what happened as their bodies exploded into a bloody mess. Parts of the mountains broke off and the earth split as huge mountain fragments began to fall from great heights. In the stone square, the magic circle constantly glowed, trying to withstand the destructive pressure coming from the sky, but it was clear from the ever-growing cracks that it would soon collapse. At the same time, the ice stronghold erected by Shangguan Bing Shui began to tremble, and the walls strengthened by her mana soon began to lose thickness and firmness. Shangguan Bing Shui had no choice but to grit her teeth, and while the ground beneath her feet shook as if an earthquake was shaking the entire world, she continued to pump her mana into the ice fortification. In the sky, purple flames and lightning began to spread from the impact center outward. More than 3 kilometers were illuminated under the purple and crimson radiance, frightening the most distant mutant beasts that fortunately managed to survive the shockwave, or those that were powerful enough to manage to survive with wounds of varying magnitudes on their hardy bodies. Kong Guiying used his tired eyes to stare at the face of the young man in front of him. And he couldn't deny that what he saw pleased him, even though his vision was covered in blood. Zemon's eyes were wide open, and amidst the blood red, those 2 bright crimson eyes were especially striking. But what pleased Kong Guiying was the steady, determined look in those eyes. Forget a child of only 20 years old, even a war veteran who experienced the terror of the battlefield would definitely have difficulty keeping such a firm expression and mentality while every fiber of his body was being torn apart and his very soul was being threatened to be wiped away. Kong Guiying wondered if he would be able to do the same during the early years of his evolution, and it was not difficult for him to find an honest answer to his question. I would really like to stay to see who comes out with the upper hand, but I'm afraid that won't be possible in this life, Brother Zemon. Kong Guiying said with a touch of regret as he looked at the stone square on the verge of being destroyed. Zemon's expression changed slightly as he realized the obvious change in the way Kong Guiying called him. For a proud and powerful existence who in his lifetime had been the king of hundreds of millions, as well as a great soul evolver of 4th order, to call him brother. It was Kong Guiying's way of showing his approval and respect for someone who deserved it from him. Brother Zemon, after this, ignore the 4th pagoda. Kong Guiying's voice sounded from behind that black sphere with lightning that had grown large enough to divide the 2 fighters. The 4th pagoda is actually the key to the 5th pagoda, where the Royal treasure is hidden. After you fully recover, go to the 5th pagoda, the magic circle will teleport you there immediately. But remember, don't enter before you fully recover, because there are powerful enemies even for you due to their numbers. Zemon opened his mouth to say something, but all he managed to do was to get more and more blood coming out of his organism, along with small fragments of flesh that were swallowed by the black sphere that was actually an even more terrifying representation of the space cracks. If this world was in its 2nd stage, we could have had more fun, but there is nothing we can do. Brother Zemon, if there is an afterlife, let's drink someday. But don't you dare go unless you die of old age, ha ha ha. The pride of my rule, I hand it to you. Leaving those words behind, Kong Guiying, who at this point only existed from the chest up, stopped pushing upwards, and immediately, the fragment of his soul that was contained within the special armor, thanks to one of its options and the power of a 4th order soul stone, suffered the consequences of the attack, pressing down from above. Everything happened too fast. Zemon didn't even have time to do anything when the swing of his greatsword that had been obstructed halfway through was finally completed. Boom! Another terrifying explosion shook the mountain range, and from a distance could be seen what looked like a small object being sent flying down, surrounded by flames and lightning, leaving a trail wherever it passed, at the same time as another surrounded by a golden aura fell, but far slower in comparison. The black sphere that had been born as a result of the world barrier breaking due to the clash and resistance between 2 forces too large for its current capacity quickly vanished without a trace, after one of the 2 resistances suddenly stopped fighting. Just before, if Kong Guiying continued to fight and persist until the last moment, there was some possibility that Zemon would be defeated as the impulse was slowly leaving him. However, if Kong Guiying and Zemon continued to fight, everything around them would have been destroyed except for the ruins that were located who knows how many meters or kilometers underground. With the destruction of the stone square, the magic circle of access to the ruins, the runes of protection and damage absorption would have been destroyed as well. In short, it was by no means incorrect to say that Xietain had saved the lives of the people in the square and the lives of those in the third ruin who might have been buried there forever. As Xietain fell from the sky uncontrollably, exhausted, and with his body covered in blood and cuts, he naturally realized the reason why Xietain did what he did. And upon realizing it, he could not stop a single tear of gratitude from falling from his right eye even though he had not shed any tears even with all the pain he felt. This kind of victory. It was a victory that if possible Xietain hoped he would never have to experience again in his entire life. Although in theory he had won, far from feeling the joy or happiness that any victor would normally feel, what Xietain felt was bitterness that would probably accompany him throughout his life. Chapter 670 Lilith's Love and the Core of the Universe. Boom! Xietan's body fell from the sky and like a lifeless rock hit hard on the stone ground of the square. Fortunately, despite the superficial cracks, the only thing that occurred during the heavy fall was a slight trembling, but it did not damage the magic circle at all. Xietan's chest rose and fell heavily with each breath, and as he looked up at the starry sky free of any clouds in a rather large range as a secondary consequence of the clash between his and Xietan's attack, he couldn't stop his face from contracting into a horrible grimace of pain. Although Xietain might have had a fall as light as a feather, the pain that struck every cell in his body and the sadness that assaulted his soul for a moment after the eternal departure of who could have been an excellent friend made him unable to focus at all enough to activate gravity manipulation. Ugh! As he immediately tried to stand up, the blood vessels in the muscles of his legs broke into pieces and blood began to leak from the cracks that now plagued every piece of equipment he wore. As for his precious battle gauntlets, they had been destroyed earlier and there was nothing left of them. Swoosh! A light breeze gently swayed Xietan's dark hair, which at this moment was practically completely red due to his own blood. Are you okay? At the very least, I am not dying. Silly. Lilith helped Xietain, but when he thought she would help him to his feet, he was actually a bit surprised when all she did was carefully lift his top to allow his head to rest comfortably on her soft, fluffy thighs. Even though the black silk dress was between skin and skin, it wasn't necessary for him to feel them directly to know that they would definitely be labeled as the eighth wonder of the world. In fact, Xietain felt that he was most likely underestimating them considering Lilith's identity and her position within the universal scale of power and beauty. Your dress will be stained with my blood. Don't worry, your blood won't stain my dress thanks to the layer of mana surrounding it. Couldn't you just have said that you don't care at all? Do you think this is one of your favorite light novels you used to read? Haha ugh. Xietain grimaced and then took a slow breath as he gently closed his eyes. A few seconds passed during which they were both silent, with only the wind blowing away the smell of Xietan's blood but bringing the smell of blood from the large number of mutant beasts and other evolved creatures that were killed by the aftershocks of the brief but deadly battle that had just ended. Hey, Lilith. Xietain whispered softly, not opening his eyes yet. Lilith inquired with a melodious hum as she looked with tender eyes at his exhausted and pale face while using her soft and delicate hands to carefully remove the bloodstains. These kinds of battles. Do they happen very often? Lilith's hands paused for a moment before she continued using her palms to wipe the blood from Xietan's face, then wiping the blood from her hands with her mana, and repeating the process with utmost care as if she was taking care of something extremely delicate and precious to her. You mean a battle where you have to face an enemy that is not actually your enemy? She asked calmly in a soft voice. Xietain nodded slightly without opening his eyes, enjoying the caresses of the woman who had managed to help him heal any existing traces of his past emotional scars and who to this day had become one of his highest priorities, if not the highest of all of them. No. These kinds of battles are by no means normals. Lilith gently shook her head even though she knew that Xietain could not see her. After removing the blood, she went on to gently caress his face as she watched his health with the help of blood manipulation regenerating the damaged tissues. After a short pause, she continued, battles like the one between you and the person called Xietain are so rare that most living beings do not experience one in their entire lives. There are even many higher existences tens of thousands of years old who have never experienced such a fate. At the end of the day, there are usually only 3 paths that 2 existences can walk when it comes to relationships. 3 paths? The first path is that of neutrality, where no one interferes in the life of the other. The second path is that of animosity, where both existences fight to the death either for the sake of evolving higher, for some kind of personal resentment, for the idea of stealing something from the other party, or many other reasons. And finally, the third path is that of an alliance. In this third path fall friendship, romance, common interests, and so on. Lilith explained using the same low, sweet tone of voice. Then, she culminated, it is very rare for a fourth path to appear. The path in which two existences that are clearly not enemies and in fact, could be good friends or even a couple, have no choice but to fight due to different circumstances that life put in front of them. I see. Xietain slowly opened his eyes, and at the same time as he sighed, he couldn't help but lament softly, guess I was unlucky. After saying those words, Xietain tried to stand up, which naturally caused the wounds on his legs and arms to worsen. However, he pushed himself up until with the help of Lilith, who seemed to understand how he felt, he managed to get back on his feet. Thank you. Do you need to thank me for something like that? Xietain didn't say anything and instead dragged his tired body to the place where in theory Kong Guiying's body would be if not for the fact that the man had no real physical body anymore. With the help of his blood manipulation skill, after taking several steps, he finally managed to partially heal his wounds and thus prevent the blood from continuing to run out of his body. Even then, it was far from enough to be recovered, and according to Xietan's estimation, at this rate of healing, it could take him at least a week or two to get back to his optimal condition. Luckily enough, however, with a godly skill such as regeneration and its second activation overlap regeneration, Xietain would be able to reduce that time tremendously, while with the support of a healing mage it might only take him a day or two to get back to full recovery. After walking approximately 200 meters, Xietain finally reached in front of the fourth pagoda and stopped dead in his tracks when he saw a small object the size of a fingernail, glowing. Xietan's pupils trembled slightly as he subconsciously muttered, that's. Lilith was surprised for a moment before she sighed and said softly, although it's a shame that it can't be used to evolve any skills or something similar because it has barely any energy left, that little one still has many uses. Maybe, the man named Kong Guiying was planning to leave it to you from the beginning. Xietain gritted his teeth and a flash of sadness crossed his black eyes that with the deactivation of the 2 levels of Blood Berserker's wrath had returned to their normal tone. He did not say anything, nor did he charge forward as any other lower existence in the universe would do in this kind of circumstance and in the face of such a treasure. Instead, as if what was in front of him had a deeper meaning in his eyes and in his heart, Xietain gritted his teeth and did his best to ignore the abysmal pain as he forced himself to lean his upper body such that his figure formed a perfect right angle. Xietain was a very proud man. Even before he evolved, long before he became the leader of a huge faction and long before he discovered that he had the potential to rule over myriads of people and, even races, his pride was firmly imprinted in each and every one of his bones. For him, the action of bowing 90 degrees was only and exclusively available to those people who somehow or other managed to earn his respect or become an important part of his life, and only his parents had seen him kneeling. However, Kong Guiying had called Xietain brother just before he left this world forever. Even though the two had only met for a couple of minutes, even though life had not given them time to chat as they probably both would have liked, Tinghua and Liang Jing were right when they said that relationships forged on the battlefield were often stronger and firmer than any relationship with years of talk. Kong Guiying's principles and ideals seemed to synchronize practically perfectly with those of Xietain. Both were men who fought for the good of their kind, were willing to make sacrifices for a bigger good, had clearly marked bottom lines, with a view on friendship and enmity close enough that both of them, despite not wanting to, faced each other with the intention of destroying the other side, and probably many more. Then, given that a fourth-order existence and someone who had been a true king was willing to call him brother, what reason did Xietain have to refuse? I, Xietain, am honored to have been able to meet a person like you in my life. Although we did not drink under the moonlight, it is the honor of me, Xietain, to be your sworn brother. Brother Kong, thank you very much for everything, he said in a respectful and slightly choked voice. Kong Guiying had been Xietan's first sworn brother, but as soon as he took him, he lost him too. As hundreds of thoughts raced in Xietan's head and his heart felt considerably bitter, the light sound of silk moving and the scent of roses he loved so much embraced him for an instant. You? Xietan's eyes widened in shock as he saw that, just like him, Lilith had bowed 90 degrees with a respectful expression on her face. For Xietain to bow was one thing, but for Lilith to do so was another entirely. Not only had she been ranked as one of the 2 most beautiful women in the history of the cosmos, but she was also a proud higher existence of the 6th order. Lilith was the holder of 2 firmament fragments left behind by existences that surpassed the limits of the soul record and one of the most powerful powerhouses in the universe. The fact that someone with such a background would bow to a 4th order existence was simply unheard of in the history, and Kong Guiying was probably the first one to achieve something like this. Why are you looking at me with those astonished eyes? Lilith looked at him sideways and said in a low voice, even though I am Lilith, a succubus of the 6th order and part of the demonic army, I am also your woman. If you, by Zeman, respect someone else enough to bow down and accept him as your sworn brother, then I as your woman must naturally show respect to him. Leaving by Zeman still shocked, Lilith lowered her head and said in a gentle voice, Brother Kong, thank you for everything. By Zeman stood dumbfounded for a few seconds before he closed his eyes and a smile slowly dawned on his face. He really managed to catch a great woman. After a minute, both of them straightened their postures and kept silent before By Zeman said in a serious voice, Lilith, I made my decision. Decision? Lilith tilted her head as she looked at him in confusion. By Zeman pointed forward and said in a firm and arrogant voice, the core of the universe, the most important city of all and the most brilliant one the history books have ever registered. Its name will be Kong City.